Good morning, buenos dias, and welcome to the board's third and final work session on the superintendent's recommended FY27, FY32 capital improvements program and boundary studies. My name is Grace Rivera-Oben, and I'm the president of the Board of Education, and I represent District 1. I will begin by asking board members to please introduce themselves for the record. I will start on my right.
Good morning, Laura Stewart, and I'm representing District 4.
Good morning, Carla Silvestre, School Board Member at Large.
Good morning, Julie Yang, District 3.
Good morning, Brenda Wolf, District 5.
Good morning, Rita Montoya, Board Member at Large.
Ms. Zimmerman?
Good morning, Natalie Zimmerman. I represent District 2.
Do we have anybody else online at this point? No? Okay. Thank you. Today's work session is the final opportunity for the superintendent to present detailed information on the recommended FY27, FY32 CIP and boundary studies, and for the board to ask any questions and provide feedback. If a board member wishes to introduce an alternative to the superintendent's pending recommendation, a motion and a second are required. Following discussion, 5 votes in favor of the motion are required to place it before the public for comment along with the superintendent's recommendation. If an alternative is approved for consideration, members of the public will have the opportunity to provide comment on the alternative at a public hearing. The board intends to take its final action at its March 26th business meeting. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Taylor to start his presentation and introduce his team.
Thank you, Madam President. Members of the board, I'll keep my remarks brief before turning things over to Mr. Mamoon, Ms. Swayatoka, and Mr. Connolly to walk us through today's presentation. We have a lot to review. The genesis of today's presentation is really to do a couple of things. To talk about the elementary boundary study recommendation, as well as to resolve questions that were introduced during the public hearings, and to present information related to those questions, as well as to do an overview of our boundary recommendations and CIP recommendations. One of the things that I do want to highlight as part of that is, given some of the feedback that we've already received from our county executive, to highlight some of the non-recommended reductions to the CIP that are also moving forward as a part of that process. This is an awful lot with a handful of discrete topics that need to be covered. But before we jump into the boundary portion of it, because we're gonna lead off with that, I want to point out that we're going to be highlighting a couple of options that have been discussed by members of the community and the board as part of the discussion today, because we do feel like we have an obligation to leave no stone unturned and to talk through some of the pros and cons and why we have made our recommendation. I want to make it clear that we are not changing our recommendation at this time, and for either study, and we'll certainly go through the details of what that looks like. So without further ado, team, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Good morning. If you could go to the first slide. So as Dr. Taylor mentioned, we do have a full agenda today. We're going to start out with Woodward and Northwood summary of the recommendation and alternate boundary options and scenarios. And then we will move on to Crown and Damascus. Same thing with the superintendent's recommendation, some additional information and alternate boundary options and scenarios. Then we would like to go through some of the follow-up questions that we received during the public hearing, as well as from the Board of Education members. And then we'll go into the details of the countywide elementary boundary study and any implications of potential closures and consolidation that could come out of that study. And then, as Dr. Taylor already mentioned, we do have to find some time to talk about non-recommended reduction scenarios and any CIP follow-up questions. Next slide, please. So before we go back into the details of the boundary study, wanted to remind everybody about our timeline. We started this back in December of 2024 when flow analytics was approved by the Board of Education. And then, we started going out to the public in the initial information sessions in April. The first round of options were released in May. And then over the summer, we collected feedback from the community, and then additional options were released in September. And then some additional options from E through H were issued in November, and then we collected the feedback and then Dr. Taylor's recommendations on the table right now. That's what we are discussing, and we're in the public hearing and work sessions. If you could go to the next slide. So moving into the Woodward, and before we do that, if you could go advance one more slide, please. We wanted to talk a little bit about, just reminding everybody about policy FAA. So it's in the heart of every facility's work that we do, whether it's a CIP or our boundary studies, and it essentially provides a framework for making equitable and fiscally responsible decisions, knowing that we are dealing with sometimes with uncertain futures, and considering instructional program priorities, physical condition of the schools, and the impact of either over or underutilized facilities on the educational programs. The next slide, please. So obviously, with that in mind, we do have board factors, and there are pros and cons of every boundary option, because some options are going to advance some factors more than others. So the objective would be to try and find a balance whenever possible. And so when developing the recommendations, the policy dictates that the superintendent will provide a rationale that demonstrates the extent to which it advances each of the factors. And then, obviously, each of the factors will be considered, but as we know, it's not possible to reconcile each and every recommendation with each and every factor. So with that, we do obviously, with the recommendation, try to create a diverse student body, and then take into account the geographic proximity of communities to schools, as well as articulation, traffic and transportation patterns, stability of school assignments, making sure that we're not moving students too often, and then facility utilization to try and strive for 80 to 100% efficient range over long term whenever possible, as well as making fiscally responsible decisions that minimize capital and operating cost whenever feasible. Next slide, please.
Can you just tell the public what FAA stands for? The acronym?
It's just the acronym, and it's
People have been asking me what it stands for, so can you can you clarify what?
So it's actually not an acronym. It is the naming convention that goes with board policies. So the board policies are all structured according to a letter convention, and FAA is just the letter convention that this policy falls into within that structure.
Okay, thank you. So many people have been asking me. Thank you.
It is the sixth policy in your sixth domain, and it is the first subdomain of the sixth policy in your sixth domain of policies.
Okay, see, now it's very clear. Thank you.
Sure. So again, we talked about this at our last presentation as well. We do get questions about why were changes made at the last minute. And as we have been, talking about this process starting about a year ago and last April, this is the process that we have been explaining, that, in the iterations that we have, we do collect feedback from the public, and the superintendent uses the feedback to present the recommendation to the board. And obviously, while working on the superintendent's recommendation, as Flow Analytics, our consultant, was involved, just like they were involved in creating all the previous options. And then we did also get concerns from the community about not getting a chance to give any feedback or vote. So two things. First of all, the feedback we received over the past year did inform Dr. Taylor's recommendation. And then, and obviously we've had, public hearings, 3 of them over the past few days, to get additional feedback on the recommendation that the superintendent proposed. And then just wanted to remind everybody that, this is not a voting process. The feedback is to allow us to understand the challenges that the community sees with each of the recommendation. And it's not a voting process. The only voting that would happen is on March 26th, when the board will take a decision on the recommendation. So with that, the hard truths about any boundary study. There are no perfect boundary solution, and there are no perfect boundary maps. So the boundary map options are created to advance policy factor, and so all of the factors will be impacted with each of the options, but in each option, some factors will have better or worse outcome depending on each option. Very few communities, and we do understand that very few communities and families want to see changes in their school assignments. However, some communities and families will have to have, change in school assignments for us to meet the objectives of the study as well as board policy factors. And then every time we do make a change, each of the options, even a small change, would have a domino effect in some other areas. And ultimately, every recommended or approved boundary assignments will include trade-offs. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Waitoka.
Good morning. I'm going to walk us through and remind everyone what is included in the superintendent's recommendation for the reopening of Charles W. Woodward High School and the expansion of Northwood. We have the summary slides here available. The more detailed slides are on our website for viewing. To the left, we have the high school map that shows the different reassignments, and to the right are the middle school assignments with their color. Just wanted to remind everyone what this recommendation achieves and what the goals are that are accomplished. In this recommendation, the percent of resident Woodward High School students participating in farms and EML services will be at the average of the high schools in this study area. We also were able to minimize island assignments and emphasize geographic proximity. Schools involved in recent boundary studies have minimal boundary reassignments. All middle and high schools in the boundary study will have facility utilization less than 100%, and obtained input from multiple stakeholders using broad outreach of community engagement. I want to share a few things of what's staying the same and what's changing, and this is really specific to the elementary schools. We've emphasized a lot of the middle school and high school. While the elementary boundaries are not changing, certainly their assignments are, but wanted to emphasize what is actually staying. So there are 47 in this study, there are 47 elementary schools. 28 of those 47 have no reassignments to middle school and high school. 3 of the elementaries have a reassignment just to middle school only. 8 of the elementaries have a reassignment to high school only, and 8 elementaries have a reassignment to middle school and high school. So on the next series of slides, as Dr. Taylor presented at the beginning, the recommendation from the superintendent is not changing. What we do want to walk through are a few different scenarios that continue to come up throughout the public. They've come up in public testimony and email. I'm sure as you all have been out in the community and talking with members of the community, and want to remind people why we didn't move forward with any of those options and why we are continuing to move forward with the superintendent's recommendation as presented on February 5th. So we want to start with, and in these series of slides, on the left will always be the superintendent's recommendation, and on the right will be 3 different options for this one. So this first one is an optional alternative. This is something we presented at the previous work session. This specifically looked at doing a split articulation for Veers Mill. So if you want to zoom in there, you'll see it changing from the light green color to the red. So it splits between Wheaton High School and Walter Johnson. The benefit, I'm going to change to the next slide. I know it's helpful to see the map. The benefit of this is it does bring the utilization and farms rate between Walter Johnson and Woodward High School closer together. However, the challenge of doing this is it adds yet another split articulation, which is something we were trying to minimize in the overall recommendation. In the next one, again, the superintendent's recommendation stays on the left. This is the original option B as presented back in October on the right. And just wanted to point out a few of the changes and challenges and benefits. So in the original option B, Wheaton High School has a higher utilization at the 95.2% and a farms rate of above 60%. And Kennedy has a utilization of 89%. And the paired elementary schools for Belpre and Strathmore have split articulation to middle school. The benefit of this brings the utilization of Walter Johnson and Woodward lower and closer together. The reason that we did not move forward with this, again, is up in the challenge, is that the utilization and the farms rate were both much, much higher for Wheaton, and we were trying to balance that out across all high schools in this study. Okay, and we're going to present one more. Again, superintendent's recommendation is on the left. This is the original option F presented back in October. I'll just pause for everyone to orient yourself. And then what has changed in this one, let me go back to the map because it's helpful, and I'll read the challenges and benefits on the next slide. You'll see here, compared to the superintendent's recommendation versus F, Garrett Park and Veers Mill change. And what this does is really create poor geography and sort of an elongated wraparound boundary for Walter Johnson. However, it did bring a better utilization for Wheaton High School at 80%. Ultimately, the geographic proximity was important in the, again, balancing all factors, but that weighed heavily on the superintendent's recommendation, which is why we did not move forward with option F. Okay, we will move forward into the next boundary, or do we need to pause? Pause, okay.
We're going to pause now because I think we're going to let my colleagues see if they have any questions. Andrew, can you, no questions? Okay, I have a question for you. Can you go back to the slide where you have the breakdown with the percentages for Wheaton, for option B? So Wheaton High School will have a farms rate of 60%? What is this like? I'm sorry, yes, you can, thank you.
I'll pull it up. I think it's 61%, but give me
Oh,
one
so it's
second.
not, it's within 60,
Very close to
62%.
Correct.
Okay. And John F. Kennedy will have almost a 90% utilization? And what would the farms percentage be?
Yeah, so option B for Kennedy Farms was 49.8% for Kennedy. And
Can you
Wheaton was
repeat that?
61.7.
I'm sorry?
Can you repeat that?
Yes, so for the original option B, Kennedy Farms was 49.8 and Wheaton was 61.7.
And so the utilization rate for Walter Johnson will be 77.7. If that, I'm sorry?
The 77.7 and the 73.8 are what was in option B.
Correct. Okay.
Are you asking for what's in the recommendation?
Yes.
Yes.
So we can compare.
Give that to you. So in the recommendation, Woodward is at 91.2. And
91.2?
91.2, yep. And Walter Johnson is 77.7, so aligns with B. What changes from B to the recommendation is the change in utilization at Woodward.
Which would be again, sorry?
91.2.
91.2. And Wheaton too, doesn't it?
Yes, and it lowers Wheaton. So Wheaton drops to 86%. And again, that's really why we moved. Under the recommendation.
Under the recommendation, but
It
under
goes to
option
86.
B, Wheaton's goes up to 95.2.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And that's resident students. That's not even including people that might apply to the programs, which are,
And with the highest farm
and with the
rate.
highest farm rate. Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding.
I
Thank
will
you.
caveat that Wheaton, and it's in our data table, and it has an asterisk for every scenario for Wheaton. We did assume 500 students attend Wheaton High School for the Edison program.
So,
That's included.
so
baked
that
in.
included program.
Correct.
I love it, but yeah, I just,
I know, right?
Miss, yes, go ahead.
So that, when you
But the-
say, so is that the same for every high school, or that's Wheaton was, you already included the 500 seats for the utilization? So the 95 utilization actually include the 500 seats, and that is not the case for any other high schools?
In this study, that is correct. In the Crown Damascus study, we did that same for Poolsville and for Seneca.
Okay, so let's focus on Woodward.
But for
So
this study,
Woodward,
yes, the
the
only one.
95% actually have 500 program seats included. Why do we treat Wheaton differently with the program seats?
Because of Edison.
Because of Edison.
Because Edison, and that is typically how many students goes to Edison per year?
500.
Correct.
Okay, okay.
And there's no other Edison school in Montgomery County. There's no other, I mean, Seneca.
Yeah, this stems from the Wheaton-Edison partnership where students from 19 different clusters can take certain programs at Edison, and then they just walk over and attend Wheaton as their comprehensive high school. So that's why the 500 place, and same can be said for the remaining clusters for Seneca.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Sorry, I was just, I didn't mean to have a side, I was asking about CREA, but that's a night kind of program, so that's not part of your numbers. Okay. Ms. Zimmerman? Do you have a question? Oh, sorry, I thought you
I'm
raised.
going to say my apologies. I actually don't have my hand up. Just
Okay, sorry.
listening.
Oh, you had your hand up.
That's all. Thank you, though.
So I just want to make sure that I have the farms rates correct. So what does modified option B, the superintendent's recommendation, what's the farms rates for Wheaton? Because you said what it would be if we went back. It was 61%.
Yeah, for the superintendent's recommendation for Wheaton, it's below the 60% at 59.2%.
59. So it's 59.4 versus.
0.2.
0.2 versus 61.
0.7.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I knew that difference. And
Sorry, can I just tag on to that? Can you also tell me the utilization for Wheaton under the recommendation? Because it's not 95.2, right?
No, it's 86 in the recommendation.
Thank you.
that's all for now.
Yeah, thank you. I have a resolution to bring to the board. If there's no other questions before we move on to the next topic. I know Ms. Malou is online, but her Wi-Fi is tricky, so I don't know if we have her logged on at this time.
She's on, but she can't turn her camera on.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to read the resolution. As a part of the boundary study process is the effort to create balanced schools that incorporate the 4 factors outlined in Board Policy FAA, Educational Facilities Planning. demographic characteristics of student population, geography, stability of school assignments over time, and facility utilization. Families have expressed their interest in proximity to their school community to support family engagement. For Region 3 of the Woodward-Northwood expansion boundary study, encompassing Kennedy High School, Wheaton High School, Woodward High School, and Walter Johnson High School, option B should strive to provide this balance. Whereas MCPS has an interest in ensuring that wherever possible, schools are in proximity to families and avoid split articulations. Resolved that the superintendent of schools will develop an alternate boundary map for the Woodward-Northwood expansion that results in Wheaton Woods articulating to Wheaton High School, Georgian Forest articulating to Kennedy High School, and Harmony Hills articulating to Wheaton High School. And further resolved that the community from Region 3, Wheaton Woods, Georgian Forest, Harmony Hills, Wheaton High School, and Kennedy High Schools have an opportunity to comment on this option. Dr. Taylor.
You need to have a second. I second that.
I was going to ask for it, but thank you. Let's do that again. There is, Board Member Carla, we're going to do it correctly, if you don't mind. Board Member Carla Sylvester has made a motion to consider the state alternative. Is there a second?
I second that.
There is a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
President Rivera-Oven, I just wanted to say that my intent in introducing this resolution is to hear from these communities that I've outlined in the resolution. We've had a lot of community engagement, and I would like to give them an opportunity to contact us either through the upcoming, if this is passed, hearing, if not, just the traditional way, calling the board office, emailing, setting up meetings with us. I would just like to give them a little more time to weigh in because it's a big decision. Thank you.
Ms. Wolf.
You know, we have had 4 hearings, hundreds of testimonies, hundreds and hundreds of emails, petitions, and local and school community advocacy. You know, for this process, we have increased the number of hearings. We've increased the community outreach. We met with a wide range of people, and everybody has had an opportunity to weigh in. We know that people are not in agreement. Every boundary hearing we do, and you have to forgive me, we know that people don't always agree with us, and they don't always agree with the superintendent's recommendation. As we start out telling people originally, we know that some people are not going to be as happy. But I think at this point, we know the pros and cons of the arguments from every community out there. Thank you.
Ms. Montoya?
Thank you. I'd just like to associate myself with my colleague Brenda Wolf's comments. We have heard from the various communities that are impacted by this recommendation, specific to the communities in the resolution as well. There has been engagement by both MCPS, by the board, by us as individuals. We've heard from, I've gotten messaging and various communications and engagements from individuals in the community. So I can appreciate the intent perhaps, but I do think that we have been thorough in our engagement.
Ms. Stewart?
I guess I have some questions about how this would actually affect the percentage of usage, et cetera, because when I'm looking at original option B, I see, for instance, that Harmony Hills actually was split between Kennedy and Wheaton High School, but this says Harmony Hills would just go to Wheaton High School. And so now I don't know if I have how this would affect the utilization, the farms rate. I'm a little fuzzy. I don't know if you all could help me with that.
I don't think we are prepared to give you exact utilizations at this time. I guess what I would point out, I think it's why Ms. Sylvester included all 3, is it's not as simple as just putting Wheaton Woods back at Wheaton. If you simply did that and didn't change other things, because I know we have looked at that, you would put Wheaton High School over 100% utilization, which I believe is why you are pointing out more than just Wheaton Woods. You're bringing in 2 other elementaries, but the exact utilization of the rest of it, we would need time to go back and analyze that.
I do see George and Forrest articulating Kennedy High School. I have some of that I can figure out because that was the original option, but it's just the Harmony Hills part. Maybe I can go back and look at Harmony Hills population. But anyway, if you don't have it, I understand, but thank you.
Ms. Yang?
I wonder, can we have the data on the original farm rate for Wheaton and Kennedy High School? You showed what's the original, like the original Plan B?
Original with current boundaries or original option B farms?
Original option B.
Yes.
That was the 61.7 for Wheaton and the
Wheaton, what
49.8 for Farms, right?
What about for Kennedy?
That was for the 49.8 for Kennedy.
49 and 61 for
Correct.
Kennedy. Can you tell me what's the current rate of farm rate at these schools?
Yes, at Kennedy currently, it's 50.3%.
Okay.
And this is for resident students only. I will say that's important to know. So it doesn't necessarily mean current, right? Because we have the DCC and other things. So people are moving around for programs. So when we say current, what is in our data table is based on resident students.
Oh, so even though the school
And
utilization.
we can give it to you in the CIP, but that will be different than what we have been sharing. Again, we have a current, but that is for resident students. So that's what I'm reading off of.
Because there's school choice in the DCC, the students that attend the school versus those that are in the residential boundary may be different in terms of their farms rate as reported in the CIP document as opposed to what is in the residential boundary zone.
Okay, so that we have a utilization is included additional students, but in our farms rate, it's only the resident student. Correct. I'm also interested, I was at a community meeting last Friday, and I got to hear about, there were 5 parents from Wheaton Woods community, and they were highlighting for me that a lot of their communities are still, this is a very new information for them, and they haven't actively participated or even learned about the different options and its implication. So I would like to see that we give that community further engagement opportunities.
Sylvester, you have any questions?
Just a point of clarification, this resolution puts this option on the table along with the superintendent's recommendation. So if I don't, the answers to our questions, we want to hear them today, but as you said, if you have information that you need to get back to us, if this resolution passes, all it does is put it on the table so that it can be considered as an option and questions can continue to be answered as the process evolves, if that is the will of the board.
So for my point of clarification, given that we're scheduled to take a vote, let's see, today's the 12th, so in 2 weeks? This would effectively also delay the vote, is that correct? Because I don't know that we can put together a whole nother hearing in time and get notice and all of that, or are we going to speed race to get that done before the 26th? Is that the intent, Ms. Silvestre, since it's your resolution?
I'll let Ms.
Well, I know, I'm not asking about process, I'm asking for you. Is your intent to have a hearing before the 26th?
Yes.
Or to push the vote out and then have a hearing?
I am not
after?
interested in delaying the vote on the 26th. There's an opportunity for a hearing on March 17th, if that's correct, Ms. Webb?
And if everyone is available, right?
Yes.
Because this is the first time I'm hearing of that date, which is next week. So all of us would also need to be available, correct? Okay, thanks.
We always strive for that, but I know it's not always possible. Yeah.
The last minute.
Ms. Stewart?
I also met with a couple times with Wheaton Woods parents, also the PTA leader there, and I think it's because they were expecting that they were just going to go to Wheaton, like they just kind of checked out. They were like, okay, nothing's changing, it's fine. So then when this came out, no one was paying attention. Also, there is majority Spanish speakers there, and so I think there was a lot of people getting overwhelmed also with the amount of information through email. And so the message was that really the majority of folks didn't find out until later, although I did not see a consensus of how they would react. So I just wanted to put that out there, that there did seem to be a level of not being aware until just maybe a week ago to this. Also, I just received some numbers to help me on this alternative. And so it looks like Wheaton utilization would be 92.9% with alternative one, or is this incorrect?
If I can ask Ms. Silvestri a clarifying question, I might be able to answer utilization now that I have your resolution in front of me. Are you trying to change anything with Harmony Hills? Because it says Harmony Hills articulating to Wheaton High School, but both the superintendent's recommendation and in option B, they're going to Wheaton High School.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I just want to clarify, are you requesting a different change?
No different changes.
Hold on,
I'm trying to understand.
I am not.
Okay.
Okay, so based on her resolve, then it's really option B, just for Wheaton Woods and George and Forest. So you can use the utilization and farms, and option B would be the numbers that you're asking for.
Okay.
That's what I wanted to point out.
I now understand what this alternative is. It was the previous alternative. Okay, thank you. I'm clear now. Thank you.
I'd like to call for the vote.
Okay. There is no more discussion. All those in favor for the resolution, please raise your hand. That will be Ms. Stewart, Ms. Sylvester, Ms. Yang.
Do we have Mr. Nuba?
Is Ms. Anuba on? No?
She is not.
She's not. Okay, so that would be 3 votes. Okay, so that doesn't carry.
No, you have to call.
Right? All opposed? That would be Ms. Montoya, Ms. Wolf, myself.
Better find out.
Ms. Zimmerman, how are you voting?
I abstain.
Abstention. Okay. Thank you. Let's move on.
You need to explain that you need.
Up, that would be great.
Just for clarification, thank you, Ms. Wolf. For the motion to carry, we need 5 votes. So I just want to make sure the public understands the motion didn't carry. Thank you.
Okay, while we're pulling up the slides, we will move into the Crown Damascus summary of the superintendent's recommendation. We'll follow a very similar format to the last boundary. So I want to start with just a reminder of where we are with the recommendation for the relocation of Thomas S. Wooten High School and the expansion of Damascus High School. On the left are the recommended high school boundaries in this study area, and on the right are the middle school recommended boundaries. And again, a full detail of this and the ability to zoom in and see all the elementary schools are available on the website. I wanted to just remind everyone of what this recommendation achieves and accomplishes in terms of goals. We were able to consider diversity of student body population in all schools, minimize island assignments and emphasize geographic proximity, and minimize split articulation to high school. It adds a secondary holding school to create cost and time savings for future construction projects. All middle school and high schools in the boundary study scope will have a utilization less than 100%, with the exception of Churchill High School, which will remain at its current utilization of 112%. and obtained input from multiple stakeholders using broad outreach of community engagement. Before we jump into sharing, similar to the other study and showing different options and the challenges and benefits, I did just want to remind the public that there are other prior examples of relocating schools. This is not the first time in MCPS history that we have done this, and we have shared 3 different examples here as a reminder. Dating back to Blair High School that was originally located at what is currently Silver Spring International and Sligo Creek Elementary School. The site was relocated in 1998 to its current location and has not moved since. Tilden Middle School was relocated on Tilden Lane from 1969 to 1991 when it moved to the Woodward High School site. It was referred to as the Tilden Holding from 1991 to 2018. As it was a holding school for middle school projects. That building eventually was demolished and rebuilt and was relocated with Rock Terrace Schools since 2020. And then Burtonsville, which is currently under construction, will be relocating to a new school on a developed pad site. Again, opens August of 2026 for us. And the existing building will be repurposed for other district priorities. Okay, I wanted to just highlight, again, the elementary boundaries are not changing as a part of this scope, but they are being impacted in terms of assignments, and wanted to give an overview of what's staying the same and what's changing. So in this study, we have 59 elementary schools. 28 of the elementary schools have no reassignments to middle school or high school. 17 of the elementary schools have a reassignment to middle school only. 5 of the elementary schools have a reassignment to high school only. And 9 of the elementary schools have a reassignment to both middle school and high school. Okay, so we're going to follow a similar format to before. The superintendent's recommendation will always be on your left, and then a few different alternatives that have come up over the course of the last couple weeks in public testimony and emails in community meetings, and just wanted to, again, highlight the recommendation is not changing. Just wanted to note some alternatives and other options that have been previously looked at and why we did not move forward with those. One alternative that we put in front of you last work session was specific to the middle schools in Region 4. And we looked at moving Stone Mill and Potomac and flipping what middle school they go to. The challenge of this is it creates a poor geography, so it creates non-contiguous boundaries for Cabin John, and that is why we did not include it in the superintendent's recommendation. The benefit of it is it does give at least 2 elementary schools articulating from middle schools to high school together. So instead of just 1 elementary from Cabin John and 1 from Hoover, at least 2 elementaries from each of those schools would articulate to either Churchill or to Wooten. Another option that has come up again over the last couple of weeks is option D. I'll just pause for you to orient yourself. And this option, it was when we were considering opening high school number 27 at Crown Farm site as a comprehensive high school. So that's what you're seeing as the difference. And then just wanted to highlight a few things on this. It does create lower facility utilization in all the high schools because we have, in this scenario, you have opened another comprehensive high school. However, it does not create that secondary holding facility that we have talked about at length over the last several months that is a need for us across many of our schools to help support the facility conditions. And fiscally, more future costs incurred for the current Thomas S. Wooten High School facility to be maintained as a comprehensive high school, and more future costs incurred for other secondary projects due to lack of the holding facility. We will, in future slides, after we get through these, we do have some operating costs of operating a 27th high school and what that number will look like, as well as using the current Wooten as a holding school. So happy to get into those in the upcoming slides. Just for another comparison, the superintendent's recommendation is on the left. This is option E. In option E, high school number 27 at Crown Farm is used as a holding school. So this does lead to slightly higher facility utilizations in all the high schools by not opening that 27th high school. However, as you've seen in the recommendation, all but Churchill fall within the 80 to 100%. This does create a secondary holding school for the district. It does not use a new facility for a comprehensive high school, and fiscally more future costs are incurred for current Thomas S. Wooten High School facility to be maintained as a comprehensive high school. Ultimately, after we looked at that, the recommendation was to move forward with using a brand new facility as a comprehensive high school, thereby relocating Wooten to that and taking advantage of a new facility for a comprehensive, but still gaining a holding facility that is much needed to move forward with many of our capital improvement projects. And then finally, this compares the superintendent's recommendation on the left with option G. And in option G, this is using high school number 27 at Crown Farm as a comprehensive high school, but with a much smaller capacity of only 500 students, and simultaneously using it as a holding school. So it's a small school. You can see it was just, I believe, Fields Road and Rosemont in this scenario that would go there, and other schools would cycle in and out. This would be combining resident students and holding school students in one facility is likely to leave the resident students without a strong sense of school community and identity. Without holding school students present, the number of resident students is too small for a comprehensive school. This does create a holding school capacity for the district. And then finally, just like we've shared in a few of the other ones, more future costs incurred for the current Wooten facility to be maintained as a comprehensive high school. I will pause there for any questions.
Colleagues have any questions, Ms. Yen?
Yeah, I appreciate the presentation, and I appreciate especially to talk through the middle school articulation. I understand we really trying to look at contiguous boundary maps, and I support that. But also at the same time, I understand, the power of a cohort of students having, a community in moving together during a transition time. Currently, Calvin John has about 2 elementary school students articulate to Churchill, and 2 elementary school students articulate to Wooten, right? Regardless where the students are going to go to high school, I would very much like to see giving them a bigger cohort to do so. So that is my my feedback, and I have a resolution to introduce after the comment.
Do you have a comment, Ms. Stewart?
We can move forward with the
And do we have a
resolution.
copy of the resolution?
Yeah, I just would like to see a copy and have a minute to read it, because this is the first time hearing there would even be a resolution as to this issue.
Correct.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Dan, would you like to read the resolution?
Thank you so much. As a part of our boundary study process is the effort to create community stability and provide families with geographic proximity, whereas MCPS has an interest in ensuring that whenever possible to maintain assignment stability and resolve that the superintendent of schools would develop an alternative boundary map for the Crown Damascus boundary study that result in Travilla and Stone Mill Elementary School articulating to Cabin John Middle School, and further resolve that impacted community have an opportunity to comment upon this option.
Thank you. Board Member Jillian has made a motion to consider this later alternative. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
There's a second by Ms. Zimmerman. There's a motion, a second. Is there any discussion? Ms. Wolf?
At the last, I believe it was board meeting, we indicated that if anyone wanted to bring any changes, they needed to submit them then. We have heard from all of the communities, considered the superintendent's recommendation, and as I understand it, any changes to that now would require the addition of another hearing for the public.
Correct.
So therefore, I'm going to oppose this motion because I believe we've had every opportunity to do that.
Ms. Sylvester?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify, at our last work session, Dr. Taylor proposed some, I don't know what to call them.
Proposal.
Tweaks to, is this basically incorporating those recommendations?
So we had an alternative that we introduced. This is, I'll let Ms. Wyatoka respond to that, but what we did is we did introduce some alternatives that we had heard in public comment, much similar to what we're doing today, which is, this is what we've heard, so we're showcasing the pros and cons based on what people had talked about in public comment so the board could opine on them.
And if you could expound on why this is helpful.
If we could pull back up the middle school slides, and I will ask Ms. Yang a clarifying question. Now that I have the resolution in front of me, you mentioned Travilla and Stone Mill. Travilla, in the superintendent's recommendation, is already articulating to Cabin John, so there would be no change. You are correct that we have Stone Mill going to Hoover, so you are suggesting Cabin John, but you do not mention Potomac. That was on the right, what we had presented last week was showing Potomac. And so the way I read yours is that actually Seven Locks, Belpre, Potomac, Travilla, and Stone Mill, all five are going to Cabin John?
So I have to be totally transparent that what it meant is that this will actually flipped. This resolution need to be reworded again.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to
It
clarify.
need to be completely flipped, the Travilla and Potomac, so that Travilla and Stone Mill can articulate to Cabin John together. That is so that to create a bigger cohort for the students during transition time. This will also help Potomac Elementary School, which has a Chinese immersion program, and the articulation to Hoover will preserve that immersion program articulation.
So can I clarify? You're suggesting what's on the right, which is flipping Potomac and Stone Mill from the superintendent's recommendation.
Yes, that is one of the proposal during last work session.
Okay, so if that's what you want, then I would suggest.
Can we hold on to this and come back with a reworded, revised version?
So
And
just
we
to
can go
clarify,
back.
this is what you had proposed, Dr. Taylor? No.
So what we had introduced at the last work session, based on the feedback that we had received from public comment, was this optional alternative. And that is what I believe Ms. Yang is trying to introduce.
I believe trying to introduce, but we should revise.
Yes, the language to reflect it.
Yes, yes.
I have a question, though. I know it was one of the alternatives that you introduced before, but if that was the intention, a hearing should have been scheduled in because it was a change to the proposal that was out in the public. So this seems to me to be a little bit out of order at this point in time.
Yeah, still, because we are not modifying our recommendation, it still would require a majority of the board to elevate.
I have a question about the process. Thank you. Would there be time for a hearing if we took up this optional alternative? I just want to clarify that before the 26th.
We have the date of March 17th if we need an additional hearing.
Thank you.
Okay, so do we want to come back to this?
I think Ms. Sylvester has something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Dr. Taylor again to kind of talk us through why this was recommended. What is this fix? It sounds like it's a worthwhile thing for us to try to tweak. So I just wanted to hear that before we get caught in the process.
So every option for every boundary has pros and cons. This has some pros and this has some cons. Looking at the map, it is not contiguous, that's for sure. So it does present some transportation challenges. It definitely presents some issues in terms of like where we have placed the middle schools. So geography, it is not geographically proximate at all. Where it does present some advantages is it does have the advantage of program articulation. It does have the advantage of stability of school assignment. Even though it looks a little messy, it does work. I don't know if it works as well as the recommendation, and certainly, we're not making a recommendation to change our recommendation, but I think it is important that the board consider the things that are brought forward by the community and that you be able to see them side by side and make your own assessment based on that information. No matter what you do with every single map choice, you are going to be weighing pros and cons, and every single option has pros and every single option has cons. We think we've captured the pros and cons for you. It really is your decision on what you think is going to be best.
I have a question, though. This is a middle school assignment. Isn't there the potential for this to be impacted by the elementary
Correct.
school boundary study?
Correct.
Yes. I think that there is also a high probability that when you take a look, because there is some geographic messiness and you have some island assignments, particularly the island assignments are problematic. And certainly something that the board will really want to tackle in earnest doing your elementary study, because you have a significant number of island assignments, particularly in this highly concentrated area. You can see on the maps right here, just looking anywhere where there's a number and you have the label key on the right, there are 12 schools just in the visible map right there that have island assignments that should be resolved. We've heard that consistently from parents.
Well, that's one of my points, because that was one of the goals of this study. So it seems to me that now you're defeating it.
Yeah, I just want to associate myself with Ms. Wolf's comments and make clear to the community, because in the way the title is set up, it says optional alternative and then recommendation, but the photos are opposite. So make sure that we're drawing our eyes. The resolution, my understanding, is to keep the optional alternative, which is that far right picture, right? And I guess I just feel a little confused, perhaps on a philosophical standpoint, because so often we're talking about, well, no, we want to keep people who are close together, we want to walk, we want to do all of these things. And then here it seems like, well, except over here, we want to do something totally different because some members of the community want something different. And so that's challenging for me as someone who has to make these decisions, because it seems very counterintuitive, not to only the goals of these types of studies, but also just to the philosophies that we go by when we make these decisions, right? And it seems like we're carving out kind of a special exception here, and that's challenging for me to do when we're not giving those to other communities.
And I would like to concur with both of my colleagues. being from District 1, we have, similar situations, right? But I'm following what we were kind of giving to do, and I feel very strongly that we cannot make exceptions for certain communities, because if we start doing that, then we should be making exceptions for other communities in the East County and then in the Yap County and other areas. So for that, I think our staff and Dr. Taylor and all of us have heard lengthily about these. So that is also my issue. Ms. Yang?
One last clarifying question. How far between Hoover and Cabin John? What's the distance between Hoover and Cabin John Middle School?
I can ask staff to pull that and get back to you in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Google Map.
They are in walking distance. For just a glimpse at this, the green flags represent our middle school assignments. The red flags represent our high school assignments. The blue flags represent our elementary school assignments. And what you have is a couple of geographic challenges. In the middle of the map, you see Robert Frost and Julius West. Below, you see Hoover and Cabin John, and way up top, you see the next region's middle schools reflected in, they're clustered very close together. So in this case, looking at this particular region, we're not done any favors by the school placement. Having them as close to where they are within walking distance, and so that presents a lot of challenges, regardless of the map that you ascribe and where this lands. These challenges are not going to go away, and they are going to be present as long as those schools are located in those places.
Exact question, 1.3 miles between the two. And I just want to emphasize, it was brought up, will this be able to be resolved in the elementary boundary study? Certainly we hope to resolve many of the islands that are across the county, but given the proximity of really all 4 of those middle schools in this area further to the east, and so many elementaries are to the west, it's complex. We have similar situation up in Gaithersburg, right?
Correct.
Where we have 2 middle schools in one elementary boundary study, one elementary. So the middle school placement across the board is not ideal for where many of our elementaries are.
Thank you. Ms. Yang, would you read your resolution again, please?
Thank you. A part of the boundary study process is the effort to create community stability and provide families with geographic proximity, whereas MCPS has an interest in ensuring that wherever possible to maintain assignment stability. Resolve that the superintendent of schools would develop an alternative boundary map for the Crown domestic boundary study that result in Stone Mill Elementary School articulating to Cabin John Middle School and Potomac Elementary School articulating to Herbert Hoover Elementary School, and further resolve that the impacted community have an opportunity to comment upon these options.
Okay, just a point of clarification. One of the, I didn't think we took into account geographic proximity as part of our, did we? We did.
So it's something that you have heard from your community?
No, I know, but
Yeah.
I'm saying, but we did not. Okay.
Yeah, that's
I
one of
mean,
the factors.
okay.
We just didn't call it geographic, it just says proximity, I think that's why.
With, okay.
Yeah.
All right, with that, okay.
I'd like to call for a vote.
Okay. So we have,
There needs to be an opportunity for discussion once the resolution has been read.
Do we need Ms. Zimmerman to second again?
Oh, because we had to have version 2.
Right,
Because this is
right. Can we
version
have Ms.
2.
Zimmerman?
so there's a motion. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Okay, there's a motion, a second. Is there any discussion?
I'd like to call for a vote, if there is no discussion. I don't see any lights on.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please raise your hand. That would be Ms. Zimmerman and Ms. Yang. All those opposed, please raise your hand. That would be Ms. Sylvester, myself, Ms. Wolf, and Ms. Montoya. Abstentions? And that would be Ms. Stewart. Okay? Yes. So you need 5 votes for this to pass, and therefore there's no 5 votes, and the motion fails. Thank you.
So we wanted to get started with some of the follow-up questions and inquiries that we received during our hearing, as well as from the board members. If you could advance the slide. We're going to talk about our transportation policy, EEA, student transportation, as it applies to both non-transported areas, and we will talk a little bit about our response to some of the questions about our transportation costs that we received from the board members. Just a quick reminder, for policy EEA, MCPS is responsible for routing buses and maintain in a manner that maximizes safety and efficiency. We're responsible for designing traffic control patterns for new and renovated schools prior to the completion of construction. MCPS will assess the safety of proposed traffic control patterns, taking into consideration safe approaches by the pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. We're responsible for conducting safety evaluation for bus stops and recommended walking routes. Students are expected to walk in residential areas along and across streets with or without sidewalks. Students are expected to walk along primary roadways with sidewalks or shoulders of sufficient width to allow walking off the main road. And middle and high school students are expected to cross all controlled intersections with traffic signals, lined crosswalks, or other traffic control devices when they're available. If they're available, sorry. Next one. So there were questions about that we received about crossing multiple lanes, and this was regarding the location at Crown Farm. So per policy EEA, middle and high school students are expected to cross all controlled intersections where traffic signals, line crosswalks, and other traffic control devices are available. There are a few examples where our students do cross roads similar to Key West, including crossing 355 Wisconsin Avenue to get to BCC, crossing Randolph Road to get to John F. Kennedy, Route 29 or University Boulevard to get to Blair, and then crossing 355 to get to Gaithersburg or RM, and University Boulevard to get to Northwood High School, New Hampshire for Springbrook, and Randolph Road to get to Wheaton High School. So to support walkability to the Crown Farm site, so the Life Science Center, the trail route will extend along the school property, and the sidewalk along Omega Drive will be widened to 12 feet. An existing sidewalk along Fields Road is currently 8 feet wide, and then many of the roads surrounding the Crown Farm site have speed limits in the 25 to 30 miles per hour range. Oftentimes what we see is once a school begins operating, nearby roads may have their speed limits also reduced to improve safety for the increased pedestrian traffic and as part of the county's Vision Zero initiative. And then we did hear some testimonies mentioning that walking to Crown could take about an hour or more for some students. So at the farthest point within a 2-mile non-transportable area, the walk should take approximately 30 minutes at a normal pace and slightly longer at a slow pace, but not exceeding 40 minutes. So based on the feedback and questions that we received from the board, we did do a cost analysis. So on average, each route costs our transportation department $125,000 per year. This includes a set of assigned schools to create both a morning and an afternoon route. So the models that we're going to show are illustrative and a snapshot from some of the 31 middle schools that are impacted in the current boundary studies. And then, we will show existing costs as well as anticipated future routes and where they overlap for grandfathering impact. That's one of the questions that we received from the board at the last meeting. As we move into implementation, we do expect the savings to get some savings once the actual routes and bus stops are confirmed. So here's an example what it would could cost us, and these are conservative examples. We could be, realizing savings as we get closer to actually routing the new, new pickups for students. So currently, for Woodland Elementary School, so we picked different scenarios. In this one, for the recommended option, Woodland will go from a straight articulation to split articulation for middle school and high school. The current middle school is Sligo for Woodland and Albert Einstein. And then in the superintendent's recommendation, it would be Sims and Einstein and Silver Creek Middle School and BCC. So the current middle school assignment, regular bus transportation, we have 8 buses serving the Sligo Middle School route, and which each route costing about $125,000. That's an existing cost of $1 million per year, which we would have to continue for the grandfathering, because we will be, in year 1, we will be grandfathering the 8th grade students. And then we anticipate for the Silver Creek Middle School and Sims, there will be 5 new routes. So there will be a cost of $625,000. So the first year it would cost roughly $1.6 million, but in year 2, after the grandfathering of 8th graders, and the cost will go down to $625,000 and will continue to be that amount or less. However, in option 2, if both the 7th and 8th graders get grandfathered, the existing cost of Sligo Middle School, the $1 million, will continue for an additional year. And then it will go down to $625,000 in year 3. If you could go to the next slide. For Laytonsville Elementary School, so this is an example of a split articulation to straight articulation for middle and high school. Currently, Laytonsville goes to Baker Middle and Damascus, and Gaithersburg Middle School and to Gaithersburg High School. In the superintendent's recommendation, all of Laytonsville will articulate to Hallie Wells and then to Damascus High School. So current cost of for Baker and Gaithersburg Middle School, because that's the existing route we would have to keep for grandfathering, is at a cost of $625,000 a year. So if the board chose to only grandfather 8th grader, which is the recommendation, the first year's cost would be $1.6 million, because we would have 8 new routes for Hallie Wells and then to Damascus High School. And then in year 2 and year 3 and afterwards, it will be $1 million. Obviously, the cost would extend for another year if the decision is to grandfather both 7th and 8th graders. And the last example that we have is for Brown Station Elementary School. This is an example of a straight articulation, 2 straight articulation. So current middle school and high school is Lakeland Parks and to Quince Orchard. And in the recommendation, Brown Station would move to Roberto Clemente Middle School and then to Northwest High School. Currently, there are 6 existing routes from Lakeland for Lakeland Park Middle School, which at a cost of roughly $750,000. And then the proposed option would add 3 new routes at $375,000. So the first year, the cost would be roughly a little over $1 million, and then would go down to $375,000. So we will be realizing a lot of savings in the transportation. However, if the grandfathering extends to 7th and 8th grade, then the additional cost of $750,000 will add on to year number 2. If you could go to the next slide, please. So again, what we talked about for the transportation cost during the transition, there will be challenges. There will be increased costs in the beginning, as we demonstrated. And obviously, we will have our resources stretched thin, both bus drivers as well as buses, and then possible service impact during grandfathering for longer ride distances. But those will eventually, after the grandfathering is completed, as the transitional grades move through and the regional transportation model takes effect. So talking about the grandfathering real quick, the proposed grandfathering for middle school implementation will take 1 year. So the recommendation is to only grandfather the 8th graders to remain in their current school to finish out their middle school years, and grades 6 to 7 will be implemented in the 27-28 school year. So full implementation for middle schools will happen in the 28-29 school year. So 6th and 7th graders whose assignments changing will need to attend their newly assigned school beginning that year, regardless of they have siblings or not. And the only exceptions, we talked about it during the program presentation, would be the students that are currently in regional programs. And then high school implementation would be, recommendation is 11th and 12th grades remain in their current high school. And then grades 9 and 10 will move to their new high school starting in 27-28, and then full implementation from all grades 9 through 12 in the 29-30 school year. There will be exceptions. We pointed out in the implementation plan that Cedar Grove and Laytonsville elementary school areas will begin boundary implementations beginning in 27-28, but other Clarksburg school students will be delayed implementation until the additional capacity becomes available in 2031-32. So middle school grandfathering, we did hear quite a bit from the community about, and we acknowledge the concerns about disruptions to middle schoolers to have to change of school assignments when the middle school years are already small. They're only there for 3 years. So the sizes of cohorts, so there was questions about sizes of cohorts. So 6th and 7th grades proposed to change middle schools together. So Arcola, about 162 students to Sligo Middle School. Woodland would have 185 students to Silver Creek. Gibbs Elementary School, 176 students to Martin Luther King Jr. Middle. And South Lake will have 194 students articulating to Forest Oaks Middle School. And then the proposal for only grandfathering 8th graders is, we do have examples. It's typical that, when there's changes in the middle school articulation, that the recommendation is only grandfathering 8th graders. And it was, that's what took place when we had the opening of Seneca Valley High School. Only the 8th graders remained in their existing middle schools, and the changes took place for 6th and 7th graders. There are ways we can, help alleviate the concerns the families have, and to make sure that the students feel welcome in the new schools, including, having common activities to help foster a sense of community, team building activities across grade level teams, students creating a new traditions together, and outdoor educations for grade 6 to visit their schools they're articulating to. Gonna move it over to Mr.
Can I just point out one error that we have noticed? The bullet for Woodland Elementary School, that is the number of students going to Sims, not to Silver Creek. Just wanted to correct that. We will get that corrected on an updated document.
You just eliminated my question. Thank you.
Yes, I figured.
I'll pass it on to Mr. Connolly now.
All right, good morning or afternoon or wherever we're at. So we heard from plenty of community members and board members alike, what does it cost to run a high school? And as someone that manages the capital budget, it's, community members are always fascinated that it costs as much as it does to get a painting project at a high school. It costs over $1 million these days. So it's a fascinating exercise just to dig deep into the numbers. So what you're seeing right now is the majority of the operating costs and the budget for the existing Wooten High School in FY26. I will have one caveat at the end, but these are FY26 numbers. So we broke it up by administrators, our principal and our APs, our lovely supporting service staff, whether it's the main office, paraprofessionals, security, building service, etc. And then more obvious teachers, textbooks, materials, other supplies, and then our utilities are actual FY25 utility numbers. So you can see we broke it up by electricity, natural gas, water and sewer, and recycling services. So for FY26, it is budgeted with assuming FY25 utilities, it costs $27.4 million to run the existing Thomas S. Wooten High School. We took a deeper dive because we've been asked, what does it cost to open a new school? I think the easiest way I can rationalize this is if we were to have 4,000 students and we opened up a new high school and we split them 2,000 and 2,000, this is the new 2,000 student. You're taking most of those teachers and you're moving them to the new building, but you are required to have resource teachers, media specialists, and other administrators, because those teachers, they'll transfer, but you're definitely adding new building services staff to take care of the building, new food nutrition services, paraprofessionals. So this is the non-enrollment based, meaning this is what you need to open up a new building and have it staffed. And you can see that's 9.6 million. And this is an annual number. So this would be additive each year. And one other thing we were asked is, well, what does it look like to operate a building, whether it's vacant or it's a holding school with a school in it? So this third chart, you can see on the left, this would be occupied with another school. The column on the right would be vacant with some community use, and this is no different than we currently only have elementary holding schools. So to give an example, high school X, Y, and Z is receiving a major capital project or a systemic project, relocates to a high school holding school. You're going to take all of those administrators, supporting staff, teachers, textbook and materials. You are going to transfer that to the holding school. So those are net neutral, right? They're traveling from their home school to the holding school. Transportation, what we did, we assumed the delta of the Northwood to Woodward. So there are typically 16 buses for Northwood High School when they were back at their home site. We had to add an additional 17 buses to transport them to the Woodward site. So this is that delta. This is that 17 bus count. And again, these are averages, the 125,000 per route. Your building service supplies, you're going to be net neutral. And we just assumed the utilities, the FY25 utilities for Wooten. When it's vacant with community use, you obviously don't need administrators, teachers, textbooks and materials, or transportation. What we did do is we assumed a 0.2 building service manager and a 0.2 security assistant. Right now, we do have rovers for building services and security assistants where they go and monitor. But this would be in addition to that to relieve those current and existing positions. And that's with salaries and benefits for that supporting services line of $28,000. The building service supplies, we did a ballpark number. The existing Wooten is about 17,000, so we did a third because you're obviously going to need to keep the building up and clean. And then utilities, what we did was we used Grosvenor when Woodland was there. So when Grosvenor was occupied, what were those utilities? And then when Woodland moved, what did it look like when it was vacant? So we applied that percentage to the FY25 utilities of Wooten. So that gets you roughly 250,000. That number could go up, that number could go down. It's all going to depend on how much that building is used. Various heating and cooling seasons, those always vary. So these are just a snapshot, and for you to really contextualize what Wooten currently costs, to run as a comprehensive high school if we added a new high school online, and then also holding high school while it's vacant and when it has another school with it.
I think this would be a good time to pause. That was a lot.
Yep.
So, Ms. Montoya.
Thank you. This is a lot of really great information because these are a lot of the questions we get asked, but I want to try to pose the question in a different way, in a way that I've heard it, because it does go towards this, but the folks in the community might not quite be picking up the answer, right? So one thing I hear is, if we're going to put money into fixing the Wooten facility as a holding to the tune of up to $100 million, right? Because that's a number that we've kind of said it shouldn't cost more than that, and that's the number the community is using now, even though it might be much less. Let's just take $100 million for argument's sake. If it takes $100 million to get that facility up to holding school status, how much, even with that, under the superintendent's recommendation, where Wooten students and faculty would move with some of the Gaithersburg folks into High School 27, which means no rebuild as a comprehensive high school for the Wooten current facility, but we're still going to put some money into it for holding. How much overall does MCPS save by not having High School 27, a rebuilt Wooten on the current site? Right, that's because here's what I'm hearing from the community. Well, if you're going to put $100 million into the Wooten facility, then we only need to raise another $100 million and let's just rebuild the school. So why are we doing that? But that is not my understanding of the numbers and the costs. So I just want to be very, very clear, because it hurts me actually when I hear community members, because they work so hard on their testimonies and getting information, but then there's one piece of information that is very clearly not correct. And I can understand then how they would think right along the path that they're thinking. So I just want to be very clear about what is being saved under the recommendation that could, yeah.
Sure. Two big pots of money that are definitely a factor. And, our objectives are about building utilization and making sure we're utilizing our existing facilities, or at least the facilities within our portfolio, to the best of our ability. There is some cost savings in the operating budget, and then there's some cost savings on the CIP, which allows us to do more and other projects. I'll start with the operating budget. The comparison here is the overhead associated with opening a new high school is $9.6 million estimated. Just to open a new facility, because again, you have to have administration, you have to have additional resource teachers, you have to have a media center that's full of materials. So if you are expanding your portfolio, this would be the annual cost that you would have to do. So not opening that is effectively a savings of $9.6 million.
Plus the operating money, which is the 27.6, which ends up to be about $37 million. So on an operating budget, by not operating an additional comprehensive high school, there's $37 million, with the 29 being the annual.
So I would say net, it's going to be 9.6 in terms of a savings for the future by not opening it. So this is the net difference. So yes, you're right in total cost.
Well, because we're also not operating an additional high school, so there's not an additional 29 million every year to operate an additional high school, correct?
Except that you're still going to operate the same number. So if you're going to still operate 26.
Well, no, because we have 26 now. If we open up a 27th, then that's an additional 29 million every year, correct?
It would be an additional 9.6 in terms of overhead, because part of the issue is that the rest of the teachers, the other 150 or so teachers, are going to be proportional to the students that are enrolled. So the rest of the staffing beyond just this overhead, this is just to open
the door open.
Just to get the door open.
Right.
The rest of that is going to be proportional and taken from other places. So you're asking a really good question.
Okay, so it's just going to come from somewhere else.
It's going to come from somewhere else.
Okay.
By contrast, though, it does cost us to have buildings in our portfolio that we're not using, and it does cost us to have buildings in our portfolio that we use for holding schools, except that the cost difference is $9.6 million, or, next slide,
like 275,000.
Yeah, 250,000 or 540,000, depending on how we're utilizing that facility. So that's the operating budget.
Okay.
No matter what, having an additional facility in your portfolio costs you money. To have the lights on, to keep it clean, to keep it secure, no matter what, it costs you money.
The
This
heat
is
has
the
to be on
difference.
still and things because of the temperature
Yep.
control and
Ha-
the pipes and moisture and.
How you're utilizing it makes a difference. So, for example, when it says here occupied with another school, the reason that so much of the costs are net neutral is because that school staff leaves the school that they were in to utilize this new school as a holding school. And so it's almost like they're a transplant. And there's a jump in transportation costs. Of course there is, because the transportation that the students were normally taking to get to their school, they may have been in a walk zone. You may have to expand transportation to account for that. All of those things get factored in. And then now the costs jump up. The utilities jump up as well because the building is being utilized, and it is not a net difference because we're still going to have utilities going on at the facility that's being fixed or upgraded or what have you, while the students are utilizing the facility as a holding school. Okay, that's the operating budget. Now let's talk about the capital budget, because this is over multiple years, and this is maybe the part that generates a lot of confusion. If we took a look at upfront costs and projects, like for, say, the current Wooten facility, we might be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 to $40 million in immediate upgraded needs, but we wouldn't do all of that all at one time. We would do that over a 6 to 10 year period of time and try to tackle those projects one at a time. Could we use the Wooten facility immediately as a holding facility? Yes, we could. Would we want to do some work to it? Yes, we would want to do some work to it. We would want to do some work to it every year in pieces and in parts just to make some of those improvements. The substantive renovations and refurbishments that we're talking about in terms of like a capital project are much, much more expensive, much, much more extensive, and would involve really taking the building down to its masonry studs and doing a much more extensive systems work than what we would do to maintain it for a holding facility. So, yes.
And how much does that cost?
So
can I chime in
on
that?
Go ahead.
On November 4th, during the CIP work session, slide 46 and 47, which are still available for the public on board docs, we did this exact comparison between Damascus, Wooten, and Magruder, and we provided cost in there. For Wooten, we did different scenarios of whether we did a renewal without a holding school. We showed an on-site without a holding school and a renewal with a holding school. And certainly the costs vary, and we tried to show that with different years of completion to account for different escalations. But looking at multiple scenarios and where they would open, and because currently Wooten is third on the list, when you look at Damascus, then Magruder, and Wooten, the numbers we shared on slide 46 were $453 million, $383 million, and $297 million. Again, depending on whether you're doing a renewal and you're swinging them on site with trailers, or you're moving them off site, or you're doing a renewal versus replacement. So that's anywhere from 30 million to 100 million. We're comparing against these capital numbers in terms
To
of the
300
savings.
to 383, I think was the highest one.
We showed a 453 as
up
the
to
highest, but that's
453,
largely
sorry.
because that one's even further out.
Further out,
because
right,
of escalation.
because of the timelines.
So,
Okay,
you know,
and so
roughly
that's-
300 million is probably a very
Right, so the
safe
gap
number.
between the highest amount of investment for holding and even the lowest amount of investment for renovation or rebuilding is far more than $100 million. And I think that's the point that I want the community to understand here, just so that we're all operating with the same numbers, right? This gap that needs to be quote unquote kind of filled, or that people are trying to say, well, you know, it's not that big, come on, we can do that. And I do understand, but it's a much, much larger gap. And again, that money has to come from the county council also. Right, it's not about that we have it back here in the, boardroom and we're just not wanting to spend it, right? It has to come from the county council. But theoretically, it's sounding like if Wooten facility could be used as a holding now, that if the county council were to give us that money, that it could be possible to move a school into Wooten as soon as the staff and students are relocated. And if we had the money, we could potentially do Magruder and Damascus rebuilds, or whatever the right term is, I apologize, simultaneously, if we had the money.
So it certainly introduces that as a possibility where before it was not. And so that definitely positions us very differently than we were even 6 months ago. It also positions us differently for HVAC projects. One of the biggest pain points that we experience with HVAC projects is that the working months for HVAC work are the summertime when the students are not in the building, which also limits our ability to do summer programming in those facilities as well. And the staff that are working there in the summer are miserable because we have to shut everything down to do upgrades to the project. It also speeds up those projects. You've captured probably one of the most critical things that often gets overlooked in CIP work, and that's the cost of time. And that the escalation of time really amplifies our costs on a pretty dramatic level. Something that costs $40 million or $30 million today could be $100 million in just a few years.
Right, so if we had the money now and could really get in front of these projects like rebuilding a Magruder, it could actually even cost less money for the county and us as well. Okay, thank you.
For context, Damascus High School is in the requested CIP at $306 million for a replacement project in today's dollars. So that's how those numbers crept up to the upper 300s, even probably close to 400.
Ms. Wolf.
I think you just said something that I really didn't understand until just now. When we talked about the possibility of turning Wooten into a holding school and needing a $100 million renovation, I didn't realize that that would be spread out over years. I thought it was going to be $100 million right then and there, which I think is very important because when you talked about possibly renovating Magruder on site, it was $100 million more. And one of the questions I always get is, well, why don't you take that $100 million, add it to the $100 million that you're going to put into Wooten and build us a new school? So that's a key point that I really didn't pick up on until just now.
And all of it is a bunch of $100 millions that we don't have, just to be crystal clear.
It's going to monopoly money. Ms. Stewart.
So I just want to reiterate something about this. So we could, folks have talked about operating Crown as like a hybrid method, right? So you would have 500 students in there, and then as we had renovations, then at other high schools like Magruder, like Wooten, then they would move in, and then as a holding school, then move out. But I'd like to live in reality, and to get the money for Magruder first, just that alone is probably going to take many years unless there's a huge jump in our funding. And then another group of years for Wooten. So I think I saw in the presentation, can you run a high school with 500 kids while you're waiting for it to be a holding school? Because that would be a lot of years with only 500 kids in the school.
So simply put, no. Not with the programming that would be commensurate with other high schools that we're offering. Part of the challenge is we're able to offer the portfolio of classes that we offer currently right now because we capture economies of scale. And when you have just 125 students per grade level, you're really talking about just a handful of sections. And if those students want to take different elective offerings, either one of two things is going to happen very quickly. Either the costs are going to shoot up and you're going to have kids that are the only person in some classes, or you're not going to be able to run certain electives because there aren't enough students to enroll in those electives, and the offerings that would be available to those students would be diminished to virtually nothing. So I get the sentiment. I appreciate the sentiment. Unfortunately, the sentiment doesn't line up with reality and how operations actually work at a high school level, and what you actually have to do in terms of other opportunities that enrich the high school experience, things like social activities, like dances and different events that schools have. Those tend to be greatly diminished when the school population falls under 1,000. When you have interscholastic athletics and activities, those too tend to be diminished significantly when the student population runs under 1,000. So in those lean years, when there isn't an extra school worth of kids in the building, the offerings and the ability for us to run those things, we would be stuck with a pretty difficult choice of either embracing exorbitant costs to run those things independently, or to not run them at all because we're not able to capture the economies of scale.
So being that we have to live in reality, that doesn't seem a viable choice to me. So that leaves us with opening Crown as a full high school, which means another $9 million a year in costs of operating another high school, or relocating Wooten to the school. Those are our choices. Would you agree for choices we could actually
Those are our
implement?
practical limitations, yes.
Thank you.
Is really limited to those options.
Sylvester?
Yes, I had heard that there's also a COMAR limitation in terms of opening at a high school at that small number of students. Is that in fact the case?
I haven't heard that because candidly, we have never had that problem in Montgomery County. That has not been one of our struggles for sure. But I'll provide some additional context and give you an example. Poolsville High School is, or could be, just based on the residents within the attendance zone, a very small school. And there is a balance to be obtained when you have a large geographic attendance zone, but a small student population. And so you're confronted with how you solve that problem. And one of the ways that you do that is by offering programming to draw students in. But really that tends to benefit the resident students actually more than it benefits the program drawn in students, because you're offering more classes that way.
And then a follow-up question to the previous question about the funding for repairs for Wooten. Where is that in the CIP? I think that's a question that has been brought up. I believe it's not in the current CIP.
Yeah,
So how's that going to work?
It's not scoped in the CIP. And again, some of this is tied to the sequence of events of how we have to scope all of this out. One of the things that I've heard in the fun rumor mill of Montgomery County is, you planned all of this all along. No, I'm sorry, we didn't. And certainly, we would have different ideas of what our CIP would look like, for sure, if this was part of that informed decision-making. We presented a CIP for the board's consideration in October. And as part of that is a 6-year plan where the first 2 years of that plan are the most meaningful, because those are the 2 years that receive the attention for funding directly. And the subsequent years are really just that. They're a plan. They are a budget. And so when we come back in the CIP process for amendments next year and for the full CIP 2 years from now or a year and a half from now, you should expect to see some of the systems work aligned, because having a better understanding of what your game plan is for facilities and how you intend to utilize them should be one of the inputs that informs the CIP. And so until that's decided, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for you to include it into the CIP without a clear pathway for you to understand what you want to do with it.
Thank you. And another worst case scenario or best case scenario, depending on how you see it. So if the board decides to go with the recommendation and move Wooten students to Crown immediately, or in the next cycle, and then we start using the Wooten building as a holding school, the sequence of the upcoming projects. Again, this is over a long period of time because there isn't a lot of money to do any of this right now. After the buildings is used as a holding school for the two schools, worst case scenario, best case scenario, and we have the money, and we have the money and the attendance, we could rebuild Wooten and reopen it as a comprehensive high school. Yes?
You have that capability because you have an additional high school facility in your portfolio. Like right now, your options for expansion are pretty limited to building something new, but having something that is in the queue, you have it. And so, yes, nothing is permanent. You absolutely have the authority and the ability to move campuses where you see fit and to make other adjustments and new boundaries to adjust for growth. This is inevitably something you're going to have to do no matter what. I think that would be the best case scenario. We would love to be wrong about projections of student enrollment. We would love to. We don't think that we are, but we would love to be wrong. But there's also a whole host of things beyond just school replacement or school renovations to use a holding facility for. Again, I'll elevate significant roofing projects, significant building envelope projects, significant HVAC projects. You could utilize a holding school for a short period of time and get a project done that would normally take us 2 or 3 years and get it done in a 4 to 6 month window and really accelerate your CIP if you had the funding to do so.
And I think we'll have the opportunity to do that in between high school projects. But I just wanted to put that out there. I don't know. I see you all.
Ms. Sylvester, we're going to move on. Sorry,
Okay.
we just have, we're not even halfway through. If you have any more questions, we can ask staff. Oh, see.
So, my turn?
You have a question?
Okay,
Please.
yeah, I have a turn. I have a question and a comment. Going together with both of your comment and coupled with communities' concern about future growth, which I would love to see. We grow as a county. That means we have economic vitality. I would love that. Is there a way that we can, as a board, to examine boundary facility you codify maybe how, because part of this is we haven't done a boundary really looking for 20 years or something like that. Is there a way we can codify and examine boundaries at a more frequent interval, and so that we can
I brought this up.
we can
Yeah, so I actually mentioned
wanna-
this last time, right, about developing a regular
Right.
cadence, but I
Yeah.
don't know that this is the space for us to talk about that.
You should, I plan to bring it up at the policy committee.
terrific. Thank you.
With that, we're going to move on.
Excellent. And that was a good transition to the next slide. We've actually talked a lot about this, but maybe just to recap the conversation, we were asked for what would be the schedule of the holding school. Until that, a decision is made by the board in terms of the boundaries. We have not formally presented a holding school, but that is something we do as part of the CIP every year. In the book in October, and when the superintendents, there is a chart in there that lists Grosvenor, Radnor, it lists all of ours, and it shows based on the funding that we request when those and who would go in those facilities. So we would anticipate that would be something we would include. If the current Wooten facility becomes a holding school, they would be added to the chart in the CIP, and we would start to show who we would sequence in and out based on approved capital projects. I think that's the important part until we have the confirmed budget and we have talked with that community as using it as a holding school. We are not going to just share, we've given lots of examples of how we think we can use it, but we can't just bring it a specific schedule. We've talked at length about the middle question of when are we going to renovate the Wooten as a holding school. We still, like many of our holding schools, we feel we could use the facility as is and over time make the improvements based on some of the ones that we shared last week in the work session. And then we've also talked about the third one already. Does Wooten as a holding school save money and time? And certainly it does. I think Dr. Taylor brought up, the remobilization every time we do Springbrook or Sherwood or any of these big high schools for 4 summers. That contractor has to mobilize and unmobilize for 4 summers, which certainly adds costs and just, overall time and money to these projects. Okay, we're going to shift gears to just a few other follow-up questions that we have received. We've received extensive outreach from Darnestown requesting to all go to Poole Middle School instead of what is currently in the recommendation, which is Kingsview Middle School. We did just want to share that we looked at that. John Poole Middle School is one of our smallest middle schools. It is incredibly, you see the capacity there of 478. In the superintendent's recommendation, you can see it's at 407, so there is room. But if we add all of Darnestown to John Poole, that enrollment would be at 110% at 530. It is certainly something we can look at down the road with a future capital project, but at this time, this is not something we would recommend based on the overall utilization and the size of John Poole.
We also have the elementary
coming up. So we have a section for you
Right.
to take a look at that. Yes, and absolutely could be part of that consideration, correct. There was another request to just do a cross comparison. So there's a number of slides. I'm certainly not going to read off these percentages, but I'll just walk you through what this is. This starts with the Woodward Northwood high schools. It shows what their current facility utilization is based on resident students, school year 25-26, what's in the superintendent's recommendation, and then an alternative looking at the Veers Mill split articulation and just comparing those various utilizations. We did the same thing for middle school. There was no change at the middle school of any of the alternatives that were discussed. So this is really just comparing current facility utilization to the superintendent's. We have done the same thing for the Crown and Damascus boundary, listing all of the high schools, their current facility utilization, the superintendent's recommendation, and then the alternative. And this alternative is referencing the middle school one that was presented. So there was no change at the high school for that. You will see that change at the middle school. Great, and the last 2 slides for this section, we just wanted to remind everyone, we've presented this slide many times since we initially rolled out the CIP in October, really highlighting what has been the history of MCPS enrollment since 1950. And we've talked about, we've been since 1983 mostly on this upward trajectory. That's, for most of us here, that's all we've ever known, right, is this enrollment growth. And the data is starting to show us something different, particularly driven by the live birth rates. And while we know that development continues to increase in various rates across the county, we are not seeing that same data with our enrollment right now. And really wanted to also point out that during this 1970s and mid-1980s, there was development growth still happening in the county, like we will probably see and continue to hope. To Ms. Yang's point, right? That is great for the county. That is a good thing for us to be experienced. And while oftentimes development and enrollment do sort of continue on the same path, that's not always the case. Again, just pointing out the 1970 to 1983, where we saw a significant decline in our enrollment, but that was not necessarily the case for the development. And again, this is not a new slide for you all either. We've previously presented this, but just highlighting, where we were at our max in 2019, at our peak of enrollment at the 165,000 students, and slowly, certainly we saw the rebound like so many other LEAs across the country of the year after COVID, but since that we have continuously seen a decline, and based on every information that we have at this moment, driven a lot by the live birth rates that have been down since 2007, we project that this will continue for the foreseeable future. So if we are ready, we can continue on to remind you all of what the proposed scope is for the countywide elementary boundary study, and the implications and potential closure and consolidation study that we intend to group together. Okay, with no questions, I'm going to keep us moving.
One question?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, quickly. So these utilization numbers are very important. The one thing we haven't talked about is future middle school programming, because we kind of had to put a pause on that. And some folks look at these utilization and think about current programs in the middle schools, and will there be room for these current programs to continue while we're looking into middle school programming?
Dr. Taylor?
That'll be covered in part of our elementary boundary study scope conversation.
Okay, so when the schools open, will the middle school conversation happen before the new, FY27, FY28?
So yes, we will have to have that conversation because of changes to mathematics at the state level. As the building utilizations are projected right now, running existing programming seems to be okay, but making changes to programming is going to need to be considered as part of the elementary boundary study shift.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to take us through some slides. We presented several of these to you all back on February 5th, but just wanted to remind you what's in front of you for consideration. A resolution will come to you at the March 26th to consider this scope of work. So I want to start by talking about the need. Why do we feel that we need to move forward with a countywide elementary boundary, and as part of that process, do consider school closure and consolidations at both the secondary and elementary level? We want to ensure that we are fiscally responsible and properly investing funds where needed by looking at factors such as facility condition, utilization, and placement of relocatable classrooms. We want to address declining enrollment through board policy FAA factors. We want to ensure that we are serving special education students closest to their home when possible. We also want to address, we've talked about a lot about this today, non-contiguous boundaries and island assignments. And specific to the elementary, we also want to revisit the paired school model and confirm that that's working and that that's something that should continue. We also wanted to start by talking about lessons learned, and this is just a quick summary. I think we all, staff, I'm sure you all, the community, we have learned a lot by going through this current boundary, the two of them, over the last almost 18 months. And there's certainly advantage to that, lots of room for improvement as we potentially move through another one. We want to continue to tap into our family engagement team as a resource. They are out and about. They know our families really well and can be a huge asset to us on the facilities team as we really lead a lot of this work. We want to identify the most widely spoken languages in the community and ensure that translation and interpretation services are provided. We want to work with the community project team to help identify means and methods of outreach to certain communities. Improve on what we've done. What other opportunities do we have? Number 4, in November, we did this across many of the different regions and all the regions. We did a multi-format opportunity with small group discussions and interactions, and we think that was a really successful format. We had members of the program team there, from the facilities team there, staff that were able to answer direct parent questions. We had maps up, so something similar to that. We've also learned over time that while we might have to do some type of large work group, that does not always seem to be as effective as we would hope. Some people don't always feel comfortable speaking up while others do. And so we want to think, what is the right size of the work group? Not suggesting we shouldn't have a work group and shouldn't use those resources, but what is the right size and cadence of meeting with different groups to make sure that all voices are heard and people are part of that process? Really want to think through the cadence of the study. Should be paced in such a way that the options presented do not feel rushed to anyone. And there's a fine line between this, right? We need to keep things moving and not drag it out for families, but we also need to make sure we give them the opportunity to participate and share input to us. And then student input should be sought more deliberately, right? We focused a lot on the parents, but how else can we engage with our students who know these schools and know our teachers and staff quite well, especially when it comes to the secondary students. So let's talk about the overarching process for this. Certainly, we will follow the criteria in board policy FAA and COMAR for development of both the closure or consolidation study and the countywide elementary study. We will follow policy ABA, which is the community engagement, and hold public meetings, public hearings. We will seek input from stakeholders and conduct broad outreach to communities, both the formal and informal, virtually and in person. We will develop multiple boundary options in order to explore various solutions. I think this, you could put this on the lessons learned too. How do we stress to the community that we will go through multiple rounds of options? You know, we heard that a lot from people that participated in the options in June of this year and then feel like they didn't understand there were going to be new options in October. That is a normal process. We will develop multiple rounds of options. And so really making sure that the process is clear with people that that will be a part. Conduct surveys and utilize other means of soliciting feedback, and prepare the superintendent and board with as much data and information as possible to make the best and informed decisions. So we see this, and you'll see this in the timeline that we'll remind you all of what we've proposed. But we see this as sort of a two-step process, starting with considering possible school closures and consolidations, and this would be for the elementary and middle schools. The board would make a decision on any of those, and then we would move in to new boundaries for all elementary schools and any middle schools that were approved for closures and consolidations. So let's talk a little bit about the scope for the school closure and consolidation study that we see as the first step in this process. We really want to make sure we start by developing an overarching criteria and metrics that would be used to determine the recommendations. We've already received this feedback from the community. We 100% agree we need to take considerations not just from facility utilization, but seat availability. And specifically, we heard it, this week in public testimony, how are we calculating capacities? And so we want to come back to you as the board and to the community, share how we currently calculate capacities, what does the state do, what do other LEAs in Maryland do, give you that full assessment and confirm if we need to change anything. That's a big part of this, looking at facility conditions, the ability to expand on site, meaning additional construction and capacity at any of the existing sites, looking at the site and program delivery limitations, and the geography and ease of access. We also want to evaluate whether there's enough room for capacity available to adjacent and nearby schools, right? That's a huge part, and where those are geographically placed. And then I mentioned earlier on the slide, revisiting the paired school model at the elementary level to see if any unpairing studies should be undertaken. And then for the boundary study, so this would be the second part, we want to make sure that we're balancing enrollment across the elementary schools and any secondary that would become a part of this based on any closure or consolidation to optimize the use of our existing facilities. We want to make sure we're addressing non-contiguous boundaries and island assignments. We want to take a county-wide look to see where boundary adjustments are warranted based on approved closures and consolidations. Again, if any, that would be the first step at both the elementary and middle school level. And then review elementary school articulation patterns and program offerings in context of the program regions, and specifically really targeting that middle school. Okay, so here are the proposed timelines in front of you. The first line is our recommendation to you all. We are proposing that we would start with the closure and consolidation process. We would do that basically in school year 26-27, and we have a more detailed breakdown in the upcoming slides if that's helpful. But ultimately, the superintendent's recommendation would come to you in early April. We would go through the same work session and public hearing process with a board action in May of 2027. That would then allow us to move into the next school year to do the boundary study process, and then give us with your board action of May of 2028 with a 15-month implementation for school year 29-30. The other two options, the second option puts your action in March, which is more traditional. We're recommending moving that out to May just to give 2 additional months for community engagement and option development, but still between the recommendation and option 2, it's still the same implementation timeline. So just wanted to point out the differences. And then option 3 does a much longer initial runway and start. So therefore, it delays the implementation by a year. So this would not be till school year 30-31. And just to close out, this really walks you through sort of what we would anticipate every couple months to happen, starting with presenting to you all the scope, going through an RFP to solicit a company, awarding that, doing the data collection and development, presenting initial options to the community, with, again, an April recommendation from the superintendent to the board for that initial school closure consolidation with the final approval in May of 2027. And then this sort of takes you into the next year, looking at the boundary, where we would move into the boundary study process based on any closures and consolidations, with a May of 2028 board action on that to be implemented in school year 29-30. And the last slide is the same exact data, just graphically shown in a different way if it's helpful to look at it in a calendar format. And with that, this might be a good time to pause for questions before we move into the CIP non-recommended scenarios.
Yeah, just a clarifying question, because we heard feedback about, for some community, relief doesn't come soon enough because their schools are overcrowded at the moment. So what we are saying is right after this boundary study, after the summer break, we are starting the elementary school boundary study and consolidation right away.
Correct. That is what our recommended timeline is, that we would roll right into this. This summer, we would do an RFP to solicit the team. Just noting that the first step would be that closure and consolidation, and then the boundary studies.
Okay, so to go with that line, this high school or secondary boundary study, which is half of our students, it's a little bit more than half, 7 grades, and elementary school is 6 grades, so a little bit more than half. It's taking us 18 months. Why does this one require 24 months?
Really because of the school closure and consolidation, right? We want to be sensitive to that. There's a lot of data that needs to be presented. We saw that this fall, right? And that the process did not feel that there was adequate time. And so we want to be mindful of that. There's a fine line of going too fast and too slow. We think the recommended timeline sort of strikes that balance of both. But we want to make sure we've given adequate time to any closure and consolidation consideration for next year. We need that information before we move into the boundary, actually drawing the boundary lines. There'll be consideration, because we can't bring something to you that we don't think we can accommodate, certainly. And so there will be initial proposals, but that's the first step.
I appreciate that comment, because you can't put the cart before the horse. We need to have a very good sense of structure or consideration. Guardrails and parameters before we proceed. Thank you.
Ms. Stewart.
Would we expect that all the closure and consolidations would be implemented with the implementation goal here?
Yes, they would be implemented at the same time as the boundaries, not prior to.
Right.
That's what you're asking.
Would there ever be, could you see a possibility that could be implemented? I knew that didn't sound right. Implemented after. Could you see a situation that could happen?
Not likely, because part of the issue is you're building boundaries under the assumption of certain consolidations and potential closures. So you would want to do that in conjunction. It wouldn't make sense for you to do that on a different timeline.
Thank you.
Ms. Sylvester?
Just a comment, just in the engagement for this process, try to think about how to do it at the schools, because there's come to this meeting, it's not working. And also in language, not translated. So much is lost in translation. So think about doing the sessions in language. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's keep going.
Great. I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Conley to take us through the CIP non-recommended scenarios.
All right, so it seems like ages ago since Caution the Canary showed up on a screen near you. And we gave we gave an overview of where we're at in terms of our facilities and where we see ourselves heading. A lot of firsts this year with our CIP. I think we really laid it out in a different format. Hopefully it was received in a more transparent way, both with tables, charts, and just extra data that we've never shown before. But again, a lot of firsts. So in October, Dr. Taylor brought out his recommendation of $2.787 billion. It's the highest recommendation ever in MCPS history. And then in November, the board followed with that request. So your request went through in November, and from November to mid-January, that went to the county executive. And mid-January, the county executive also recommended his largest MCPS CIP at $2.135 billion. We really appreciate the county executive's, largest recommendation ever. However, that left us $652 million short of your request. So on February 11th, we met with the Ed and Culture Committee. And that was when we were formally requested to do what we are asked almost every single year, last year being the exception to the rule, and create some non-recommended reductions that would align with the county executive's recommendation. Again, this is not recommended by MCPS. This is not recommended by the Board of Education. This is an exercise we must do in order to try to align your request to the county executive's recommendation. So some of the highlights, that yellow column is the overall 6-year request. You can see the $652 million reduction. And we're gonna highlight that FY 2029, the board's request was $518 million in FY 29. And the county executive's recommended CIP was $273 million with a delta of, it's a reduction of $245 million. The reason this is so important is this is the first year of construction for our single largest project ever, Damascus High School. It's also the first year of construction for our single largest middle school project, Eastern Middle School. And it's also the majority of construction funding for alternative education programs. This is a very important year for MCPS. So just putting that out there. So his overall 6-year was reduction to 652. It removed Sligo Middle School and Sligo Creek Elementary and reduced the scope of Eastern. This was due to, in part, the suspension of the closure of Sims. It removed turf installation. It removed the headquarters project at CESC. It did not reflect level of effort inflation, and we'll get to that in a second, and it reduced our school security systems in FY 27. All right, there he is. Without further ado, Caution the Canary. So based on our school system size, we presented this back in the fall that we should really be opening up some sort of major capital project, whether it's a renovation, a renewal, or a replacement. We should be opening 9 of those per year, 6 elementaries, 2 middle, and 1 high school. We are opening 2 elementaries this upcoming fall, Burtonsville and Joanne Lelick. But for the first time in decades, we could really dig in, but decades, we don't have a project in design. Lelick and Burtonsville are the last, we have not been designing a school. So I want to put that in context. Main reason for that is we've been building a lot of high schools, Poolsville, Woodward, Crown, so Northwood. That's the majority of our, so people were like, can you find another 300 million? Well, that's not really realistic in the world that we're living in right now. So it has consumed the majority of our CIP the last few years. So we're going to go over these non-recommended being in bold reduction scenarios. There are 2 scenarios in front of you for the public. In both of these scenarios, we want to show that these monies here, these expenditures, they can't go anywhere. These buildings are currently under construction. It shows you the amount, $17.5 million for Burtonsville. But without adding a single project, not an HVAC project, not a restroom project, not asbestos abatement, not any of our salaries in construction, the projects that we have coming online in the near future that are already under construction take up almost 45% of the county executive's recommended CIP. I should also note that the county executive's recommendation is above what can be approved in the spending affordability guidelines. So it's likely that we're not going to get that level of funding. So just throwing it out there, that's about 45% where our hands are tied. We're building these schools, they're going up. Some of them are opening up in August. So for both scenarios, we suggested that we maintain the completion dates or the 6-year funding totals for the following projects. Damascus High School, which in the 6th year was $284 million with a completion date of August of 2031. Eastern Middle School would remain on schedule, and we reduced the scope because of the capacity with $131 million, August of 2030 completion date. Our alt ed programs, we're prioritizing that with a $31 million budget, plan to open up in August of 2029. We also did not touch our HVAC replacements, tech mod, roof replacements, school security systems, our facility planning, which is important for us because that's how we plan on paying for the boundary study, the possible P3 consultants, any feasibility studies, that's where those monies come from, and our materials management relocation, which is our warehouse, in which we already have an executed lease. So all these projects remain the same that they did in the board's request. All right, in both scenarios, the following major capital projects, delays or removals occurred. So there were 4 elementary schools that were recommended and requested to have a major capital project. That was Piney Branch, Burning Tree, Cold Spring, and Highland View. So Piney Branch and Burning Tree would be delayed by 1 year with a completion date of August of 2032. And it would delay Cold Spring and Highland View by 3 years with an estimated completion date of 2034. The reason for this, the priority is simply put is our CIP prioritization framework. Piney Branch and Burning Tree in that framework were ranked higher in priority. So that is how we came up with these priorities. It also removed Sligo Creek Elementary replacement and Sligo Middle School major capital project, which aligned with the CE's recommendation. In both scenarios, we removed early childhood centers of $41.6 million. The holding school improvements, if we're not going to be able to move schools into these elementary school holding schools, makes sense to remove that. Our transportation and regional support facilities delayed 3 years. Planning was supposed to start in FY27. We've delayed it to FY30. And the CESC project, instead of the conventional using geo bonds and any other local funding sources, we assumed a public-private partnership, which Dr. Taylor brought up in October. And we assumed a placeholder of $10 million a year. We delayed it by 1 year, which reduced its 6-year total from $223 million to $30 million, with the majority of the funding coming in the out years. We are going to show the expenditure schedule in a little bit to show you what that looks like. All right, more numbers. All right, the way you read this is the top line is the CE's, the county executive's recommended CIP. And this is what these non-recommended reduction scenarios get us. So that scenario A that that we're going to talk about, it's $162,000 less than the county executive's recommended CIP. From there, you can see year by year expenditures. So in FY27, this non-recommended reduction is actually still $4.3 million over the county executive's recommended CIP. Again, our exercise is to try to get it as close as possible. With construction, it's pretty difficult because you construct when you construct. You can see in FY29, we're over by $78.6 million. Again, Damascus, Eastern, alt ed. Those are all first year construction. We are under in the out years, FY30, 31, and 32, $47 million, $3 million, almost 41 million. So you can see how these expenditure schedules line up. We felt it was very important to keep our countywide projects showing a 3 to 5% inflation, like you did in your request. Traditionally, it's been a stagnant level of effort. If you ask for $10 million for PLAR in FY27, it would extend till FY32. That is not reality. So what we did was we added 3 to 5% to reflect reality. Even that, it might go higher than that, and we're still not getting a level of effort. In the CE's recommendation, he did not do that, so we kept this for all of our countywides. You can see it, ADA compliance, asbestos, BIMPI, which is building modifications and program improvements. Everything in that where it says notable changes, we kept that escalation cost. Scenario B is the same exact scenario that we just presented, except in FY29, we removed all of the countywide projects, except for HVAC and a few others. But the majority of the projects that we have, the majority of the countywide projects would go away. So, yeah.
So that's like 52 million.
That is the 52 million that you're seeing in the reduction, yes. And this was purely an effort to do the exercise that we were asked. Again, we're asked every year. Last year actually was the first year we never had to do it. But yes, you can see a lot of these projects would be completely eliminated for one fiscal year.
Can you just give me an example of one project that is no longer going to be there?
Yeah, sure. So
Sorry, I couldn't read that.
Yeah.
We'll call them out.
Yeah, we'll call them out. So scenario A is on the left, scenario B is on the right. Any of those the tan color, those were years and projects that you had expenditures in, and they no longer have an expenditure. Any number that's in red would be a different number than what we presented to the county executive originally. So this could be technical adjustments. It could be delaying, a Cold Spring. It could be delaying a Highland View or Piney Branch Cold Spring. It's that you can see the delay for the Transportation and Regional Services Center, the CESC project. That sort of comes in pretty hot and heavy, $10 million starting in FY30. So these are the adjustments. So you can see from scenario A to scenario B. Look at scenario B. Focus on that middle column, the FY 2029, and look how much tan there is. Those are all the projects that we're missing. So we're missing BIMPI, our building modifications and program improvements. We're missing emergency replacement of major building components. Just throwing it out there, we have chillers and boilers that break down mid-year that we can't fund on the operating side, so we build in a little cushion. That goes away. Fire safety upgrades, guess what? No fire panels. We're not replacing any fire panels that year. Improve safe access, outdoor play space and athletic infrastructure. No relocatables, no restroom renovation projects for FY29. Again, this is a non-recommended. It's a little tricky because we actually came in $52 million under the CEs, but this was purely to do our due diligence and do the exercise that we were asked to do. Again, we've done it every year except for last year. So we're happy to answer any specific questions.
Yeah, I have a question. On the early childhood centers, I see nothing but tan all the way across.
A and B.
Yes. So my question is Burtonsville Elementary, the current Burtonsville Elementary, that we were at one time thinking of as an early childhood center, so when they moved, then that building would just be sitting empty?
Correct.
Okay.
If you want to talk about the operating budget.
Pretty depressing.
So this is a significant burn because we know that there's some of the best investments we can make in K-12 are actually in early childhood.
Yep.
It's tied to the blueprint for sure, but our mandate is K-12. And so we have to definitely take care of our K-12 space first as a priority, just because we are in such dire straits financially. we would love to invest in early childhood. The Burtonsville Center is ideally situated for us to expand our early childhood footprint. We are just running out of money.
With the requirements of the blueprint, though, how does that go along with the requirements of?
So the blueprint does have a portion of state funds that come to us, but they primarily come to us as operating dollars, not as capital dollars.
Zero capital dollars, zero. So one example, though, I know everyone's tired of hearing about enrollment decline, but specifically in the NEC, we saw some enrollment decline for schools that were intended to go to that Burtonsville Early Childhood Center, and they're actually able to accommodate 2 or 3 additional gen ed pre-K classes at their home school. So we're actually accommodating roughly the same amount. We're just not opening up that new facility, which it's pretty timely that we showed that holding school chart earlier. You can see the overhead that it cost, but those students are actually being served closer to their home. So we were actually very fortunate that happened this year, but not sure what the future holds on that.
But I thought we were also, in addition to early childhood, looking at moving some sort of special needs programs into that building.
Correct. We were going to do a split model. We were going to do, we were going to open up with 6 gen ed pre-K and 6 PEP classes. But those classes are, some of those are being absorbed right down the street at Greencastle, to be perfectly honest.
Okay. And you also removed money for the holding schools, which I understand why, but I would encourage you to look into partnerships with some of our city councils.
Municipalities.
Particularly Rockville is interested in partnering because they're very concerned about any potential holding school because they're worried about having empty buildings in their city. So they want to work with us, and I would encourage you to look to Gaithersburg also. That's if we do end up voting to do it that way. Thank you.
Ms. Montoya?
Thank you. I have just kind of a general question about the way this works. So I heard you say that based on the county council's current spending affordability guidelines, which sometimes is the acronym SAG, that the county executive's recommendation for the CIP is still way over. So we're not getting that. So based on the county, is that correct?
It's not way over.
But it's
they can
over.
go up to 10%, and it's 10 point.
So the council does have one additional opportunity to make an adjustment. However, the executive's budget is over. That said, spending affordability is for the entire CIP, and MCPS, while it's a big part, is still only part. So, the council does have prioritization decisions to make within the spending affordability.
Right. Okay. And so based on the current spending affordability guidelines, and we know that the county executive's recommendation is about 10% over, I guess, do we have like a ballpark number that you wouldn't, based on all the things we know, we're probably not going to get more than this under best case scenario, and so should we be thinking even more so about cutting? Because is you kind of get where I'm going?
So the capital budget does work a little differently than the operating budget. In the operating budget, again, the board does have more discretion within the categories. The council does need to appropriate by project, which is one of the reasons they ask for this exercise. But I do want to reemphasize that this exercise that we were asked for does not change the board's request. We stand behind the board's request. So the council, as it gets closer to making actual funding decisions, will give us more information about their decisions on the projects. But because in the capital budget, the council appropriates by project, we will work with them as they begin to make those funding decisions. The board doesn't need to take further cutting decisions unless asked.
Right. I guess what I'm asking is, right, we said, okay, so the difference between our requests and the county executives is $652 million. But then we're saying that's also about 10%, more or less over what the council's spending affordability guidelines are. So then it seems like, well, when we're talking about entertaining potential non-recommended cuts, we're not just looking at $652 million, we're looking at.
Most likely.
Right?
I'll give a very, very lay example.
Okay.
If the county executive recommended $6 billion for the entire county CIP, and for whatever reason, the spending affordability guidelines, whatever the case is, the full council only accepted $5 billion. All $5 billion could go to MCPS. It's not feasible at all. So the number could go up just because the overall CIP for every agency, HHS, transportation, parks, all of that.
Everyone would just hate us.
Yeah, pretty much. But there is flexibility with the full council to
Right.
shift the overall amounts by year, by project. It's a line item budget that
And that's where the by project becomes really important. That fiscal year 29 is just really
Yes.
concerning to me. You know, we
Correct.
can all be, you know, somewhat okay, perhaps if we have to be about the next 2 years, but then in 29, we're just at a real stuck place.
So I think too, I mean, again, so the CIP is a very massive jigsaw puzzle. It's, 40 jigsaw puzzle.
Every step forward, step backs, yeah.
And in part because, again, so the council asked for the school system's first stab at some priorities, and that's what we've put forward. That's to help them inform their deliberations. But as Mr. Connolly said, they could make that kind of or something short of that allocation decision. And ultimately, the reason that we put scenario B forward was just to be responsive to what the executive put forward. The council may have its own priorities for FY29. They may not have the same priority. They may think FY29 is just fine the way it is. So again, we were just trying to provide an illustration, and really scenario B is intended also to illustrate what our priorities are in terms of the projects that require continuity. So I think I appreciate how it looks, but also I think there's a number of steps left to go.
Thank you.
So I appreciate that we talked about the private-public partnership model for our headquarters. Will we also be looking at that model for other projects? Because I think that could make a difference in some of our other projects that we had to remove from this budget.
So I think
Yes, we do. Although, first step, we think we need to get through the elementary county-wide budget or study and the school consolidation as a first step. We want to make sure we are investing capital dollars, whether it's the traditional GeoBond process or the alternative delivery method. But yes, that is something we will absolutely want to explore once we get through the study first.
Because reality is kind of hitting us in the face right now. And like you said, we don't even have a project in design. We cannot continue down this road, right? And so I think having that P3 consultant and thinking about that moving forward, I think we're there at this point, in my opinion. And so I look forward to that being presented to the board.
Ms. Sylvester?
You took my question, Ms. Stewart. So I'm just going to ask a follow-up there. So I also agree that we need to look at P3s because this is not sustainable, and our school facilities are good for economic development in the county. People want to move to Montgomery County and have a nice building and not worry about HVAC. So this is an economic development imperative, so we have to explore other options. Could you tell us what are the advantages and disadvantages of a P3 in high-level terms? Because I know we're running out of time here.
Yeah, essentially what it does is it spreads out the payments. So instead of having to have $80 million in GeoBonds available in the 3 years that we want to design and build an elementary school, that would be spread over a 30-year payment. And often you're going to want to bundle multiple projects together, or in the case of a CIC, we think that's a big enough site and project that could be a standalone P3 project. But the other ones, it's really spreading out that payment plan over a much longer period of time than how the bonds are currently.
It's been described as a mortgage.
Correct.
Right? So
Correct.
It will cost you more in the end.
It
but
will.
it allows you to buy a house and live in it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We can continue. That'd be great.
Excellent. Home stretch. You're on the last section. This was asked, again, as a follow-up to many of the public hearings and emails, trying to go through as many of the follow-up questions specific to the CIP or hey, hardware is not working, door hardware at a school, or HVAC. And so we tried to capture those that we've heard over the last couple of public hearings. I want to just start with a reminder slide with HVAC costs over the last 7 years. And this is something similar to what we have shared throughout the CIP process. So the numbers show actual cost per square foot for an elementary school HVAC project that had similar scope. In 7 years, the price per square foot increased by 143%, while funding levels only increased by 35%. We've talked a lot about that, right? We are just not keeping up in terms of the overall funding that we're receiving versus the construction escalation costs that we're seeing. Funding levels should have been at $63 million in FY25 to keep pace with inflation, and MCPS received $35 million. So in doing that, right, we're just cutting the number of overall projects that we can fund in any given fiscal year. So we did a comparison on our lovely chalkboard that we like to provide, looking at 2019 funding levels versus 2025. 26 million average cost per square foot. We could fund 8 projects. Increased, we now receive, again in FY25, 35 million. The average cost per square foot has gone up, not quite tripled, and now we're looking at only 5 projects. So although the number has gone up, the funding level has gone up slightly, overall, because of the overall cost per square foot, we have less HVAC projects in the queue. Okay, so one of the first questions we talked about, we received the question of how many school gymnasiums do not have air condition. Just to make sure everyone's clear, the reason this comes up is originally when we designed and constructed schools, we only put heating and cooling in the classrooms. That was not included in the gymnasium. So we've just provided that number for you. As things have been designed since 2019, whether it's for a major capital project or a standalone HVAC project, we are starting to add the AC, but this is going to take us time to get through these. This is not a problem that we are going to solve in the next 6 years of the CIP. That's really what I wanted to articulate here. And then similar to the chalkboard exercise, just wanted to provide a real world example of a systemic project. So meaning this was a standalone HVAC project at Brookhaven. It was initially estimated to do that project at $168,000 in 2019. And when the actual project took place and construction was completed in 2024, the gymnasium portion was 613. So that 168 was just for the gymnasium, to be clear, not the whole school. That would be a steal if we could do that. So we went from 168 to 613 in that 5-year period.
Can we just pause there for a second and take it all in? Because one of the things that I constantly hear from the community is, what did they do with our money? Where does our money go? They get billions of dollars. They are half the budget of Montgomery County Public Schools. Who are they paying more money to? Can we just pause on that for a little bit and just digest it? So you're telling me that when we did estimated cost, because they're going to say, well, are they made of gold? Like, what kind of material did they use? Like, where did you get this from? I mean, is this especially made? Like, that is a huge difference.
We actually get economies of scale being such a large school system. I was talking to some other LEAs, they pay $150 to $190 a square foot, where we're at $128 because we do so much work. So we're actually getting a better rate.
So you're telling me this is even cheaper?
Yes.
So
unfortunately, yes.
So I really would like us to just digest this slowly, because if I was not part of the board, if I was not so immersed in what we're doing and how we're making decisions, I will just say to you, what the heck? Are you serious? Like, who is making these deals? Do you know what you're doing? Who's buying? I mean, so I think this is, and Dr. Taylor helped me out here, because when we look at this is just one example. So of the different things that we had approved in 2019, right? We probably have other examples that would be similar to this.
Yeah.
And this is for an elementary school, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just very quickly, there are some economic factors that are drastically influencing this, as well as school construction costs that are worth communicating. Changes in fiscal policy have definitely impacted the cost of capital in terms of debt service, for sure. One of the more significant changes is the cost of materials and supplies, but the most expensive part of this is changes in the labor market that support this industry. So in terms of just construction in general, as well as HVAC repair, as well as other aspects, affordability has played a significant role in the labor market in terms of whether or not there is an adequate labor force to do this work. And good old supply and demand comes into place where there is not an adequate supply in the labor force, and there is not an adequate supply in the raw materials because of tariffs or changes in our immigration policy federally, that everything is going to cost more. And we actually predict that it is actually going to go up, not down.
Thank you. All right, we can continue.
Another question we received was talking about our HVAC position specific to our maintenance department. So not construction, but to maintenance, the men and women that make the repairs on a daily basis. So we have 42 positions within that team. That includes our supervisors, our assistant supervisors, and our HVAC techs 1 and 2. That also includes 3 positions that you all funded on the task force. In this fiscal year alone, we have posted that position 3 times. We sort of do it every couple months to try to gain new staff on that team. We have 13 vacant positions right now, and over the 3 attempts, we have hired 2, noting that 1 was an internal promotion, which we always are grateful that we have that opportunity to promote, but that also doesn't really fill a vacancy. So it's a position that is a high priority for us. We will continue to post it on a rolling basis. But just wanted to point that out as a request that was received. HVAC at Sherwood, folks wanted to know what the current status is. That is in our current CIP in front of County Council. It's funded over the 4 years of FY 27 to 32, with the hopes that that is approved in County Council in May. And then Newport Mill came up. We do agree with the testimony that was shared with the rattling. We have been battling that for the last couple months. We keep sending the team out. They make the repairs, but that is a system that needs to be replaced, and that is why it's in our CIP showing in FY 32. Edison High School, we are aware there is shell space available on the upper level of that. This was the same bullet that we shared with you all as a follow-up back in November for one of your work sessions. It's about 9,000 square feet that's available. And again, in today's dollars, we're estimating that that build out would be $3 to $5 million. So something we can certainly consider as we continue to look at utilization and need across the high schools. Folks wanted an update on the build out of the shell space at Potomac. We have a couple classrooms, 2 grouped, and then 3 on the other side. They were starting to see an increase in enrollment, but based on the recent staffing allocations that have come out over the last couple weeks, we are not sure that we need to build that out quite yet. We are working closely with the administration to make sure we are staying on top of that potentially for school year 27-28, but based on their current allocations, we believe they should be able to accommodate the students within and out without building out anything for school year 26-27. Meadow Hall came up a number of times. We did have a pretty significant pipe and plumbing burst that happened in December that did impact a number of classrooms and the gymnasiums. I appreciate the team that was swift to respond, stop and repair the pipe burst, but given that it did take us a while to clean up, the students were displaced for about a week and a half, and then they returned in December, but the gym floor did need a complete replacement, new striping that did reopen to the school last week. Throughout this entire process, we have had our indoor air quality team out there performing any assessments and remediation to make sure that the space was fully restored. What can be done to improve the Fields Road health room? The health room does not meet the space requirements we currently build out for new elementary schools. This is clearly not uncommon when it's an older school, right? And we have not done a major capital project there. This would require a significant investment to relocate the main office and health suite to an adjacent location next to the main entrance. This project is currently under programmed and will be evaluated in a future year pending available funding. We were not aware of the Fields Road statement that was made for the additional parking lights, so that is something we are still evaluating and happy to follow up with additional information. The need to redesign the Welcome Center and front office space for QO was brought up. This is quite complex. We have looked at that. I would say there is not a perfect solution, how you enter, and so we will continue to look at that and come up with a better solution. We don't disagree that it's not perfect to how it is, but there's not a simple and easy solution at that one. Cabin John Middle School, there are two that were brought up for this one, both roof leaks as well as the retaining wall. And you all asked a question, very good question about warranty. So I want to talk about two things related to the roof leak. We do typically have 20-year warranties on all of our roofs. That really is just for the material of the actual roofing material. In the case of Cabin John, we have determined that the roof leaks, and we do agree there are active roof leaks, and we've been working with the school administration this week to resolve them. We have continued to be in that process, but they're actually tied to the roof drains based on our team's assessment and getting the manufacturer out there. The roof drains are something that are not included in the warranty. So this is something that we need to own. We do have roofers on staff. They were on site yesterday. Will probably not be there today due to the rain, but they will continue to make those repairs over the next week or two to resolve that. So that's where the warranty does get complex. Some things are fully covered and some things are not. At Cabin John, also the retaining wall that leads up to the basketball courts. It is something we have been monitoring and assessing over the last couple months. We had a third-party engineer evaluate that for us. At this time, they have identified a few repairs that they are recommending to make this summer. We have reopened the basketball courts. It is deemed safe for students to use. We do want to make a few repairs this summer by adding some expansion joints and repairing the fence. But we do think that with those repairs, it is safe to use, again, on the basketball courts. Do you want to take a few of these? Yeah. Sure.
All right, one of the questions we heard is, why does Richard Montgomery High School need relocatables or portables, bottom line programs? If you looked in the boundary study packets of information, they actually, with resident students, are underutilized by 95 students. So that overutilization really does come from the regional and countywide program that they have at the current Richard Montgomery High School. One of the questions was, is there going to be a full high school wellness center at Woodward? There currently is a high school wellness center at Woodward, which is serving the Northwood High School community. I'm actually going to be leaving here in about 2 minutes to go to the joint HHS and Education and Culture Committee, and we're going to talk more about this on the future of what services are going to be provided at Woodward. Similarly, we're going to be talking about the Crown Farm site. They originally were going to build a full high school wellness center that has somatic services, positive youth development, and other mental health services. Since we started construction, they actually pivoted. They have a new term called Connections to Wellness, which is currently going through their budget process. But essentially, it's that Bridges to Wellness program that we rolled out, or HHS rolled out in 2021, where we have at 19 high schools. It's the same type of program, but they have additional therapy, case management, and PYD services included in that. So that is what's currently being designed right now. And
Yes, we're going to send DJ off to represent us over at council. A lot of meetings happening. One of the other questions was asked about, can we operate Sims without using Stairwell 7? You know, in the recommendation right now, Sims would be reducing students by about 300. We have looked at this, we've talked at length, and I've spoken with the school administration there. I am not sure that we can just completely, what connects Stairwell 7 is the 1934 wing. It's a 3-story wing. The middle floor is actually shared by Sligo Creek and by Sims. I think just by overall the student reduction, the improved use and circulation on that stair will certainly change. What we'd like to do is take this opportunity, should the recommendation go through of the boundary, to relook at that wing as a whole. Where where do we want Sims to occupy versus Sligo Creek? Is there a better way to allocate that would improve the overall circulation of Stairwell 7? So we will come back to you with that. I think this is a good opportunity to relook at that 3rd floor of the 1934 building. Why are we not concerned about the utilization by Woodward? We've talked at length about this, certainly in the last work session, and we believe that we have built in enough capacity to handle the new development that is in that area. Same question certainly was asked for the utilization at the Wooten Farm, Crown Farm site, and sort of same response. We've been looking and we'll continue to evaluate the pipeline data that is coming in, but we feel we have adequate capacity based on the enrollment projections and the pipeline data that is available. All right, almost there, just a few more. Clarksburg High School. Why can't all of Clarksburg area go to Clarksburg High School? And specifically, we've got a lot of questions about Snowden Farm. Currently, they have this split articulation between Damascus and Clarksburg, and in the recommendation, all of Snowden Farm would go to Damascus. So, we just wanted to acknowledge that Clarksburg students, especially those in Snowden Farm service area, are having to travel a little bit further in this recommendation. Unfortunately, just the density and where Clarksburg High School and many of those elementaries that are right there, adjacent and a more rural and the building, make it extremely difficult to send all students living in that area to Clarksburg High School. And we talked about in the last work session, taking advantage of the capital funds at Damascus to build more capacity versus adding additional capacity at the Clarksburg High School. Darnestown Elementary has come up a number of times about a sidewalk. This is, when you're looking at the school in Google, it's a sidewalk requested along the north end of the building. I just want to emphasize, we'll continue to look at this with the school, but at this time, we do not recommend this. There are adequate sidewalks around the entire facility. Except for that, it is not a path often traveled. There's a parking lot in the back that our staff use and after hours use, and there's an entrance there. There are sidewalks for students to egress safely during a fire drill or any other emergency, and there's front parking for visitors that also have sidewalks to that. Adding a sidewalk there is challenging with the topography, and it actually crosses over where our dumpsters and recycling are. And so at this time, it's not an area that we would recommend one because we feel we have adequate sidewalk everywhere else. And I believe this is it. Why does Lex Manor show no enrollment change in farmland? Enrollment is projected to decrease. So even though there are 228 students built into Lex Manor's projections from development during the planning period, there's an overall decrease in student enrollment as the smaller cohorts move through the grades. So farmland, there are only 29 students built in the projections from the development during the planning period. The size of the kindergarten class is much smaller than the 5th grade, coupled with the very large 3rd grade class that will result in a natural decline in enrollment by 28-29 school year. Even though the projection assumes a large kindergartner than September 30th, 2025, it does not offset the difference between the upper grades. And the final one that we do not have a slide for, but I received a question this morning, and this has come up a number of times, is just the assurance that when the Crown High School opens, that there will be playing fields, a football field, all the appropriate athletics fields, and an auditorium. And I just want to assure everyone that yes, and that is fully under construction as we speak.
It's a full school. Thank you. The last example before that one really is foretelling of what we're going to see as a trend in other areas of the county where the projection was higher, but then in reality, the enrollment is lower. So like Ms. Stewart said, we're getting faced with some harsh realities coming up. Ms. Stewart?
About utilization at Woodward, is there currently room on site if we needed to add classrooms? Because I do remember that it was originally planned for to be bigger.
Yes, so just like Crown, it was built to the 2,700 core, so it has the larger, capacity for gymnasium, cafeteria. The addition can fit about 6 classrooms there, and yes, there's a planned location.
Great. I have a kind of a cleanup question before we leave. I received an email concern that there was only going to be 2.5 elementary schools at Sims, but it's my understanding that the majority of Woodland would actually go to Sims. Is that correct?
Yes, the majority of Woodland will go to Sims.
And it's like closer to 90%?
Correct.
Okay. And one very last question on the CIP. We didn't talk about the playground and athletic surfaces, and I just wanted to ask if that ends up getting cut as a line item from County Council, would we prioritize replacement fields that are at their end of their use, or artificial turf fields?
Are you asking if because in what was in front of you all was both a combination of new artificial and replacement of existing.
Right.
Are you asking of those, which one we would prioritize?
Yes, if that line item gets cut from the County Council.
Yeah, I would say certainly we have to first prioritize any replacements to ensure that those are properly maintained, but we still stand by the recommendation that's in there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Not seeing any further questions, this will conclude today's work session. Thank you so much to staff for being here. We appreciate it. Board members, if you have any additional questions or feedback, you know where your board chief of staff is and how to reach her. With that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you so much and have a blessed day.